Imagine, if you will, the year is 1888. The fog rolling off the River Thames is not the romantic mist of Victorian novels. It is a thick, yellow, suffocating soup of coal smoke, industrial soot, and the damp breath of a city that never stops consuming. You are standing on the corner of a narrow, slick cobblestone street in Whitechapel. Above, the gaslights flicker like dying stars, barely piercing the gloom. All around you, the city of London pulses with the frantic energy of the greatest empire on earth. But here, in the shadows of the East End, the empire feels very far away. In the heart of this labyrinth, thousands of people are not living, they are calculating. For the average labourer in these soot-stained streets, existence is not defined by dreams or ambitions. It is defined by a brutal, unforgiving daily arithmetic. Before the sun rises, before the first whistle blows at the docks, the math has already begun. A bed in a common lodging-house, 4p. A loaf of bread, 2p. A cup of thin, lukewarm coffee to ward off the biting chill, a halfpenny. But the wages are a ghost, a shifting figure that shrinks with every delay, every rejected piece of boot leather, every lost hour in the damp. Tonight we aren't just looking at history, we are stepping into the boots of those who walked these streets. We are tracing the path of a single penny as it slips through fingers, struggling to buy the only thing that matters, the energy to survive one more day. We will explore the stalls selling jellied eels that have sat too long in the cooling air, the penny dinner halls that smell of boiled cabbage and desperation, and the silent, cold rooms where the only thing cheaper than the food is life itself. This is not just a story about hunger, it is a story about the complex, heart-wrenching economics of the Victorian poor, a world where being fed did not mean being full, and where survival was the greatest, most exhausting work of all. As we peel back the layers of this forgotten London, you will feel the weight of their choices. Every bite of food was a trade-off, every meal was a negotiation with oblivion. Join me as we walk through the narrow alleys where history was forged in the heat of a struggle for the simplest of human needs. The channel's Sleepy History with Benedict is a storytelling platform created for entertainment, inspiration, education, and the promotion of positive emotional values. The morning doesn't begin with a sunrise in Whitechapel, it begins with a sound. It is the rhythmic coughing sigh of 100 souls waking up in a single unventilated room. You wake on a doss, a makeshift mattress of straw or thin, threadbare rags that offers no respite from the damp stone floor beneath. The air here is heavy, thick with the scent of unwashed bodies, stale pipe tobacco, and the pervasive, cloying smell of wet wool that never quite dries. This is the common lodging-house, the temporary anchor for those who have been cast adrift by the shifting tides of the Industrial Revolution. To stay here, you had paid your 4p the night before. 4p, a fortune to some, but here it is merely the price of a horizontal space for 6 hours. If you didn't have the 4p, you didn't have the bed. It was that simple. Thousands of men and women spent their nights patrolling the dark embankments of the Thames, walking until their boots wore thin, simply because they couldn't afford the luxury of a roof. You stand up, your joints stiff from the cold that seems to seep out of the brickwork itself. In the 1880s, the Victorian obsession with industrial progress was in full swing, yet the domestic reality for the East End labourer was a return to something primitive. There is no central heating, no glass in the windows that isn't cracked or patched with layers of grime, and definitely no hot water. You walk to the shared basin, the water inside already skimming with a thin layer of ice reflecting the pale grey light struggling to enter through the high, soot-streaked window. Your day depends on the piecework waiting for you in the workshops, the endless cycle of finishing leather boots, sewing shirts or sorting rags, but before the work there is the hunger. It is a dull, gnawing ache in the pit of your stomach, a reminder that your body is a machine that requires fuel it hasn't received in 12 hours. You check your pockets. You have 3 pennies left. 3 pennies to survive until the day is done, 3 pennies to trade for warmth, calories, and the hope of earning 4 more pennies by tonight so you can afford to do it all again tomorrow. The streets outside are beginning to stir. You hear the clatter of carts, the shouting of costermongers, and the distant low hum of the docks. You step out into the yellow fog, pulling your collar tight, trying to preserve what little warmth you have. Every step you take is calculated. To buy a warm breakfast is to sacrifice the midday crust of bread. To buy a penny loaf is to risk walking home in the dark without a candle. This, you realize, is not just poverty, it is a precarious, fragile balance. You are walking on a tightrope, and the wind is blowing, and the bottomless abyss of the workhouse is waiting below, ready to catch anyone who loses their footing. You arrive at the workshop, a cramped, low-ceilinged room where the air is so thick with dust from leather shavings and fabric lint that it catches in your throat. This is a sweatshop in the literal sense, a place where the humidity from 30 breathing bodies, combined with the heat of the iron stoves needed for gluing leather, creates a stifling, feverish atmosphere. There are no clocks on the walls here, but everyone knows the time. Time is the master, the overseer, and the executioner. The master of the workshop sits on a raised stool, his eyes darting from hand to hand, watching for the slightest hesitation, the smallest stutter in the rhythm of production. You are a boot finisher. Your task is simple yet grueling: to attach the soles, trim the edges, and polish the uppers of heavy work boots destined for the feet of sailors or factory workers elsewhere in the city. You are paid by the piece, not by the hour, not by the sweat, but by the finished unit. If the needle slips and tears the leather, you pay for the material. If the glue is too thin and the sole peels, the piece is rejected and you receive nothing. As you sit at your bench, your fingers move with a mechanical precision born of exhaustion. You don't dare look up. To look up is to lose a second. To lose a second is to lose a halfpenny. By noon your back is screaming, a sharp, white-hot agony that travels from your neck down to the small of your back. You haven't eaten since the previous evening, and the hunger has shifted from a sharp pain into a dull, vibrating weakness in your limbs. You watch your neighbour, a man whose hands are permanently stained with dye, his face hollowed out by years of this same routine. He is working faster than you, his breathing shallow and rapid. You know why? He has a family, or perhaps he just has a debt to pay. The workshop is silent, save for the rhythmic thwack-thwack of hammers hitting leather and the hiss of the gas jets. It is a symphony of survival. In this room, the Victorian ideals of dignity in labour are stripped away. There is no dignity here, only the cold, hard arithmetic of the penny. You calculate. If you finish 12 pairs by 4 o'clock, you might clear enough to buy a slice of hot peas pudding and a cup of tea. If you fall behind, you go hungry. The irony is not lost on you. You are making boots for the world, yet your own boots are worn through at the soles, letting in the damp of the London streets with every step you take. You are the invisible gears of the British Empire, grinding yourself to dust to keep the machine moving, never realizing that the machine cares nothing for the oil that keeps it turning. The iron bell finally rings, signalling the end of the shift. The sound is not a relief, it is merely a transition from one form of suffering to another. You stand up, your legs trembling as the circulation returns to muscles that have been locked in place for 10 hours. The workshop door swings open, and you are hit by the blast of cold, damp air from the street, a sharp, unwelcome reminder that the outside world is as unforgiving as the bench you just left. You step out into the twilight. London at dusk in the 1880s is a landscape of shadows. The fog has thickened, swirling around the street lamps and muffling the sounds of the horse-drawn cabs on the main thoroughfares. You are exhausted, your eyes stinging from the gaslight and the dust of the workshop, but the gnawing in your stomach has become a desperate, demanding beast. You reach into your pocket and feel the cold metal of your earnings. It isn't much. After the deductions for damaged material and the use of tools, you have barely enough to secure your lodging for the night, and perhaps a morsel to silence the hunger. You begin to walk, your feet heavy, scanning the street for the telltale glow of the street food vendors. This is the hour when Whitechapel truly comes alive for the hungry. You see the flickering naphtha flares of the stalls, casting an eerie, dancing light on the faces of those who, like you, are hunting for their evening ration. The smell is a complex tapestry of the East End, the sharp, vinegary tang of pickled whelks, the comforting, earthy scent of roasted potatoes, and the underlying metallic stench of the gutter. You stop at a stall selling jellied eels. They sit in white enamel bowls, glistening with a cold, gelatinous sheen that turns the stomach of anyone not accustomed to such fare. To a hungry labourer, however, they are a miracle of cheap protein. A halfpenny buys a small bowl. You watch as the vendor scoops them up with a scarred, calloused hand, his own face hidden by the brim of a greasy cap. He doesn't look at you. There is no need for pleasantries here. It is a transaction of survival. You take the bowl, the cold slime sliding against your tongue, providing just enough substance to keep the light from fading from your eyes. As you stand there, eating in the biting wind, you observe the others. There is no camaraderie, only a shared, silent understanding. Everyone is preoccupied with the same internal accounting. You think of the penny dinner halls where, for a single penny, you might get a bowl of soup that is mostly hot water and a scrap of turnip. Is it worth the walk? Is it worth the queue? Your mind is a flurry of calculations, trying to stretch your meagre wage into a form of stability that never quite materializes. You are a man or woman existing on the razor's edge, where the difference between a satisfied hunger and a hollow, aching void is exactly 1/2 penny. All stories on this channel, Sleepy History with Benedict, are fictional, thoughtfully crafted around historical themes and inspired by real events, figures, and periods, reimagined for engaging storytelling. The content does not represent real individuals, actual events, booked or documented cases, any resemblance to real people, animals, or events is purely coincidental. You turn away from the eel stall, the salt still stinging your cracked lips, and start walking toward the district's mission hall. It is a brick building that looms larger than the surrounding tenements, a beacon of sorts. On its weathered sign, faded paint declares it a penny dinner hall. You've heard the whispers, they serve hot soup, and for a tired worker who has spent 12 hours at a workbench, the promise of heat, both in the stomach and in the room, is almost irresistible. The queue is already snaking around the corner, a collection of gaunt faces and slumped shoulders. People stand in silence, their eyes fixed on the ground, each one wrapped in their own cloak of quiet desperation. As you join the back of the line, the damp cold of the London evening begins to seep through your thin, worn jacket. You shift your weight, trying to ignore the ache in your heels. Here, in the flicker of the streetlights, you see the true face of the city, not the marble statues of the West End, but the quiet, enduring suffering of those who built the foundation of that glory. Inside the hall, the atmosphere is heavy with the scent of boiled root vegetables and the steam of hundreds of damp coats. You pay your penny, your last precious penny, and receive a wooden bowl. The soup is thin, pale and watery, but as the heat reaches your core, you feel a temporary, fragile sense of restoration. You watch the volunteers, middle-class men and women in stiff collars and starched aprons, moving among the crowd. They look at you with pity, a look that burns almost as much as the hunger itself. They see a case to be solved. You know you're a human being just trying to reach tomorrow. This is the strange dichotomy of the 1880s, a society that built grand cathedrals and museums while simultaneously struggling to figure out how to feed its own children. It was a time when the gap between the haves and the have-nots wasn't just a divide, it was a chasm, and for many in Whitechapel there was no bridge. If you are finding yourself drawn into the quiet, haunting reality of this Victorian world, please take a moment to subscribe to the channel and hit the notification bell. By joining our community, you support us in bringing these deep, immersive historical narratives to life, allowing us to continue exploring the hidden corners of the past together. Your support is the heartbeat of this project. As you finish the last of the thin broth, you look around the room. There are no smiles here, only the muffled sound of spoons against wood. You wonder if this soup will be enough to keep you going through the long, dark shift tomorrow. The math in your head doesn't stop, even when your belly is slightly warmer. You calculate the cost of the next day's rent, the possibility of a coal fire, and the looming reality that even with this charity, you are still essentially alone in the dark. The walk back to the lodging house is a blurred journey through a landscape of shadows. The street lamps seem to have grown dimmer, their light struggling to penetrate the thick, greasy fog that now clings to the ground like a shroud. You pass alleys where the darkness is absolute, places where men huddle in doorways hoping for a bit of warmth from a stray chimney vent. You have your 4p for the bed, but the guilt of that expenditure weighs heavy in your pocket. You could have saved it, perhaps found a sheltered corner behind a warehouse, but the thought of the cold, unyielding stone floor is a terror you cannot face again. You reach the lodging house, a crumbling Victorian townhouse that has been partitioned into 1,000 forgotten sorrows. The door creaks open with a groan of rusted iron. Inside, the air is thick, a suffocating mixture of sweat, wet boots, and the smell of cheap shag tobacco. The manager, a man whose face is as hard and pitted as a piece of dry coal, sits at a high desk, his ledger open. He doesn't offer a greeting. He simply holds out a scarred, thick-fingered hand. You drop the 4 pennies into his palm. He drops them into a tin box with a metallic clink that sounds like a gavel hitting a block. You walk upstairs, the wooden steps groaning under your weight. The room you enter is vast and cavernous, filled with rows of iron bedsteads. Some are occupied by sleeping forms, lumps under grey, scratchy blankets. Others are empty, waiting for the next weary body. You find your assigned space, a frame that wobbles alarmingly. There is no privacy here. You are separated from your neighbour by nothing more than a thin layer of air, and the shared, miserable reality of your situation. You sit on the edge of the bed and begin the ritual of the night. You don't take off your clothes, your boots stay on, tucked beneath the blanket to keep them from being stolen in the dark. Your coat is pulled over you for extra warmth. As you lie back, the mattress crackles, the straw inside shifting to accommodate your tired frame. You stare at the ceiling, where a single flickering gas jet casts long dancing shadows that seem to mock you. Around you the room is not silent. It is a symphony of the discarded, the raspy, wet cough of a man in the corner, the rhythmic shifting of bodies, the occasional low mutter of a nightmare. These are not your friends. You do not know their names, and they do not know yours. In this room you are all simply numbers, 4p units of human cargo. You think of the life you had before the city swallowed you, the faces of kin that are slowly blurring in your memory, replaced by the harsh lines of the faces you see in the workshop. The hunger has been replaced by an exhaustion so profound it feels like a physical weight. You close your eyes, praying for sleep, but even in your dreams you're back at the workbench. Your fingers moving, the needle flying, the arithmetic of the penny echoing in the silence of your mind. You wake long before dawn, not because you are rested, but because the cold has finally conquered the thin protection of your blanket. Your throat feels like it has been scrubbed with wire wool. You sit up, your head spinning for a moment, and your mind immediately returns to the cycle. What will you eat today? In the Victorian East End, you aren't just buying food, you're entering a game of high-stakes gambling. The market stalls of Whitechapel are a marvel of ingenuity, but not in the way a modern chef might define it. It is the ingenuity of decay. Everything here is second-hand. If a butcher in a more affluent district has meat that is turning green, it isn't discarded. It is loaded onto a cart and sent to the East End. If a baker has bread that has gone hard as a rock, it is remoistened, sliced, and sold to the labourers who have no other choice. You remember the penny soup from the night before, and you wonder what was truly in that bowl. It was mostly the water used to boil scraps of bone that had already been boiled 3 times over. The vegetables were the bruised, discarded ends that the markets couldn't sell to anyone else. Yet to you it felt like a feast. This is the tragic truth of your existence. Your body is being fueled by the refuse of the city, you are surviving on the cast-offs of the wealthy, and you are paying for the privilege with the very few pennies you earn through backbreaking labour. There is a grim science to this, though you don't have the words to describe it. You're suffering from a chronic, creeping malnutrition. You have enough calories to keep moving, just barely, but your body is starved of everything else. Your skin is pale and sallow, your hair is brittle, and your teeth, those that haven't already rotted away, are loose in your gums. The jellied eels you ate yesterday, while cheap, were likely sourced from the filthiest stretches of the river, processed in unhygienic vats, where hygiene is a concept for the upper classes, not for those who live on the edge of a penny. You realize that the system is designed to keep you in this state. If you were truly fed, truly nourished, you might have the strength to fight back, to leave this district, to demand more. But when your energy is entirely consumed by the act of finding your next meal, you have nothing left to give to the idea of a better life. The food is more than just sustenance, it is a cage. It keeps you weak, it keeps you dependent, and it keeps you here in the cold grey streets of Whitechapel, counting your pennies until the day you finally stop counting altogether. You look at your calloused palms, tracing the dirt embedded in the lines of your skin, and you wonder if you will ever taste something fresh, something that wasn't born from someone else's leftovers, but there is no time for such fantasies. The morning whistle is about to blow, and the work, the eternal, unforgiving work, is calling. You step out of the lodging house and into the morning crush. Whitechapel at dawn is a tidal wave of humanity. Thousands of people are flowing through the streets like a sluggish grey river, all heading toward the docks, the factories, or the workshops. Yet, despite the press of bodies, the friction of shoulders, and the cacophony of iron-rimmed wheels on stone, there is a profound, chilling silence. This is the crowded solitude of the Victorian poor. Everyone is too exhausted, too hungry, and too preoccupied with their own precarious survival to offer a glance, let alone a greeting. You see a woman clutching a thin shawl, her eyes hollow, staring at nothing as she walks. You see a man with his hands deep in his pockets, his posture bent as if trying to shield his heart from the biting wind. You are all part of the same machinery, yet you are utterly alone. It is a strange, paradoxical life. You spend your nights in a room with 50 other people, your days in a workshop with 30, yet you might go weeks without a single conversation that isn't about work, prices, or the weather. To speak is to expend energy you cannot afford. To connect is to acknowledge the misery you are all trying so hard to ignore. The social hierarchy of the streets is rigid. You learn quickly which alleys to avoid, which vendors to trust, and which corners are claimed by those even more desperate than you. You observe the pickpockets and the urchins who weave through the crowd like ghosts, their existence even more ephemeral than your own. They are the ones who have fallen completely through the cracks, the ones who don't even have a penny for a lodging house. You feel a flicker of fear when you see them, not for yourself, but for the future. You are only one mistake, one missed day of work, one illness away from joining their ranks. If this journey into the shadows of the past has moved you, please consider hitting the like button. It helps this story reach others who appreciate the quiet, reflective depth of historical storytelling. And if you haven't yet, subscribing to the channel ensures you won't miss our next chapter in this exploration of the human experience. Your engagement truly breathes life into these stories, turning solitary research into a shared journey of understanding. The street widens as you reach the industrial district. The fog begins to thin, revealing the grim, soot-blackened facades of the warehouses. You watch the smoke belching from the chimneys, curling into the sky like the dark ink of a ledger. You are heading toward another 10 hours of labour, another day of counting every halfpenny. The silence of the crowd is heavy, a physical weight that reminds you that in this city you are invisible. You are the grease on the cogs of progress, a necessary part of the world that the world itself chooses never to see. You keep your head down, your pace steady, and you disappear into the maw of the factory, just one more shadow in the endless hungry streets of London. Midday in the workshop is a time of sensory decay. The initial energy of the morning has long since evaporated, replaced by a dull, throbbing malaise that sits behind your eyes. The constant repetition of your task, trimming, stitching, hammering, has turned your movements into something primal, something disconnected from your conscious mind. Your hands are covered in black dye and thin, ragged cuts that never truly heal because they are never given the chance to. It is in these moments of mindless labour that the mind begins to wander. When you're not actively calculating the price of a potato or the cost of a night's sleep, you find yourself drifting back to things that happened before. You remember a window in a countryside cottage where the light didn't look like the yellow gloom of London, but like warm honey. You remember the smell of fresh bread, not the stale, sawdust-filled loaves of the East End, but bread baked with real flour cooling on a wooden sill. You try to hold on to these images, but they are fragile. They are ghosts. You know that if you lean into them too hard, the sharp, stinging reality of the workshop will snap you back, and the pain will be all the more intense. You are a ghost inhabiting a living body, a person whose life has been erased by the sheer, relentless necessity of staying alive. There is a profound sadness in realizing that your past is becoming more vivid than your present. You wonder if this is how everyone here feels, if the person sitting at the next bench is also secretly mourning a lost home, or a lost love, or a life that didn't involve counting pennies in a damp room, but you never ask, you don't dare. To speak of the past is to admit that you have something to lose, and in Whitechapel it is safer to be empty. You look at the pile of finished boots beside you, a small mountain of leather that represents your day's labour. They will be sold for prices you can barely imagine, worn by people who will walk over the same streets you tread, never noticing the people who made them. It is a strange, hollow existence. You are part of the city's lifeblood, yet you are discarded. You are the architect of its comfort, yet you are denied even the most basic warmth. The sun, unseen through the smog, begins its slow descent. You know this because the gaslight flickers to life, casting that familiar, sickly, greenish glow over the rows of workers. It is the signal that the day is nearing its end. Your body is screaming for rest, for a moment of silence, for something, anything that isn't the relentless ticking of the clock. But the work continues, the needles fly, the hammers strike. The arithmetic of survival remains unchanged, and you, like a prisoner in a cell of your own making, continue to calculate, to toil and to wait for the night to reclaim you once more. The day ends, but the arithmetic of poverty never sleeps. As you collect your meagre pay, a few coins that feel dangerously light in your palm, you are immediately confronted by the reality of the debt trap. In Whitechapel, you rarely own your labour, you are almost always renting it. You owe the lodging house for your bed, you owe the corner stall for the tea you drank on credit 2 days ago. Perhaps you owe the workshop master for a set of needles that broke during a fit of trembling, or for the rent of the bench you sit at for 10 hours a day. It is a system designed to ensure that you are never truly free. Even when you're technically paid, the money has already been spent. You are essentially working to pay off the cost of being alive just long enough to work again. You walk past a dimly lit doorway where a man stands in the shadows, a ledger tucked under his arm. He is the local agent, the one who provides advances to those who cannot wait for payday. His interest rates are predatory, his collection methods are silent and swift. He represents the final layer of the Victorian poverty machine, the one that turns your desperation into profit. You keep your eyes fixed on the pavement, walking faster, terrified that your shadow might betray your fear. To live in this world is to be a master of risk management. You know that if you pay the rent, you go hungry. If you eat, you risk being evicted. It is a constant, agonizing trade-off that leaves you perpetually on the brink. You see others, those who have given up on the math, succumbing to the numbing influence of gin or falling into the arms of despair. They have realized that the equation never balances, and they have decided to stop trying to solve it. If you're appreciating the depth and detail we are uncovering in this historical journey, please consider sharing this video with a friend who loves history. Spreading the word helps our channel grow, allowing us to delve deeper into these forgotten lives and bring more stories from the shadows of the past to light. Every share is a step toward ensuring these voices are heard. You reach the corner where the familiar smell of wood smoke and dampness greets you. You are exhausted, your soul feels as thin as the broth you consumed earlier, and yet there is a strange, grim pride in having survived another day. You have paid your debts, you have secured your bed, and you have, by the grace of sheer endurance, avoided the bottomless pit of the workhouse for another 24 hours. You are a survivor of the Victorian machine, a ghost in a city of stone, and as the night deepens you realize that the most incredible feat of all is simply that you are still here, still calculating, still existing in the silence of the East End. As the night truly takes hold of Whitechapel, the street noise dies down to a low, mournful murmur. You find yourself leaning against a cold brick wall, watching the moonlight struggle to reflect off the greasy puddles in the gutter. It is in this stillness that you feel the profound weight of history. You are not just a worker, you are a witness. You have spent your day contributing to the immense, sprawling output of an empire that prides itself on being the workshop of the world. Yet, as you look at your own hands, scarred, stained and shaking, you realize that you are the shadow behind that light. History books rarely record the names of those who lived in lodging houses, those who ate cold eels, or those who performed the endless repetitive tasks that allowed the Victorian era to flourish. You are the invisible history, but you are also the foundation. Without your labor, the boots would not have been made, the shirts would not have been stitched, and the city would not have hummed with its frantic industrial pulse. There is a strange, melancholy comfort in this realization. Even if the world forgets the individual, the collective act of survival is a testament to human resilience. You have endured hunger, cold, and a system that seemed designed to crush the very spirit out of you, yet you remain. You are a link in a long, unbroken chain of those who fought to see the next sunrise. The city is changing, though you might not see it from where you stand. The gaslight will eventually give way to electric, the horse-drawn carts will be replaced by the roar of engines, and the slums of Whitechapel will eventually be cleared. But the struggle, the arithmetic of survival, is a constant that echoes through the centuries. It is the story of the human condition, the desperate, beautiful and often tragic drive to find enough to eat, a place to sleep, and the quiet dignity of holding on to one's soul amidst the machinery of a changing world. As you finally make your way to the lodging house door, you pause one last time. You look up at the towering dark silhouette of the city, and for a fleeting second you feel a connection to the millions who have walked these streets before you, and the millions who will walk them long after you are gone. The story of the cheap meal is the story of humanity itself, the hunger for more than just bread, the longing for a life that is defined by more than just the cost of a penny. You push the door open, the creak of the hinge signalling the end of your day, but the narrative of your struggle, quiet and persistent, lingers in the cold, damp air of the East End. This content is inspired by and adapted from public domain works available through Project Gutenberg. The material has been transformed through original narration, editing, and storytelling to create a unique experience for educational and entertainment purposes. The morning light does not break in Whitechapel, it bleeds into the sky. It is a slow, sickly transition from the absolute pitch black of the night to a bruised monochromatic grey. You are awake long before the bell, your eyes snapping open in the dark, straining against the silence of the lodging house. The air is so cold that your breath mists before you, hanging in the stagnant room like a ghost. You lie still, afraid to move because movement means acknowledging the reality of your body. Your muscles are locked, stiffened by the dampness of the room and the exertion of yesterday. You think of the boots you need to finish today, the quotas set by the master, and the elusive, flickering promise of a hot meal that might not even be enough to sustain you until the next dawn. The cycle is a heavy iron wheel, and you are bound to it. There is a particular kind of dread that accompanies the early morning in the East End, a quiet, heavy sensation that sits on the chest. It is the realization that today will be exactly like yesterday. The same walk, the same cold, the same hunger, the same faceless people moving in the same silent patterns. You wonder if this is all there is. You wonder if, somewhere beyond these soot-blackened streets, the sun actually shines on fields of grass, or if that is just a dream manufactured to keep people like you compliant. You slowly push off the heavy, coarse blanket. Every part of you protests. As your feet hit the floor, you feel the biting chill of the wood seeping into your bones. You don't wash, there is no water, and even if there were, it would be a waste of precious time. You simply stand, shake out your coat, and pull it tight around your narrow shoulders. Your fingers, calloused and mapped with the scars of 1,000 tiny needle pricks, are already itching for the rhythm of the work. It is a strange, horrific conditioning. Your body has become so tuned to the labour that even in rest it feels incomplete. You step toward the door, passing the rows of sleeping men, their faces obscured by the shadows and the thin grey light. You are a part of this living, breathing, suffering architecture of humanity, yet you are utterly, profoundly alone. You descend the stairs, the sound of your own footsteps the only thing anchoring you to the earth. Outside, the city is already beginning to murmur. The milk carts, the early morning sweeps, the distant clatter of the docks, the great, relentless machinery of London is waking up, and you are just another gear that needs to be greased. You step out into the street. The fog is waiting for you, a thick, cold embrace that smells of coal and industry. You turn your collar up against the wind, adjust your cap, and begin to walk. The arithmetic of the day has already begun. You check your pocket, 3 farthings left. It is a delicate, fragile balance, a game of numbers where the stakes are your very life. You don't know what the day will bring, or if you will be back to this bed by nightfall. All you know is that the street is long, the work is hard, and the hunger, that persistent, gnawing beast, is already waiting for your return. The wind that cuts through Whitechapel in midwinter is not merely moving air. It is a physical entity, a sharpened blade of ice that finds every gap in your threadbare coat. As you walk toward the factory, you feel the cold not just on your skin, but deep within your marrow. It is a slow, creeping numbness that tries to claim your limbs, turning your movements sluggish and deliberate. You see others on the street, hunched over, their heads tucked low, resembling a parade of weary, forgotten soldiers retreating from a war they never chose to fight. Your mind drifts to the midday break. It is the only thing that keeps you moving. You aren't dreaming of luxury or comfort. You're dreaming of the penny warmth. You imagine a slice of hot roasted potato, charred and salty, or perhaps a bowl of soup so heavily watered down that it resembles tea, yet hot enough to send a shudder of relief through your trembling frame. In this climate, calories are currency. To be cold is to burn your own energy to stay alive, and you're already operating on a deficit. Every shivering fit is a tax on your dwindling reserves. You pass a small, windowless shop where a baker is sliding a tray of loaves into an oven. The aroma of scorched flour and yeast hits you like a physical blow. You stop for a second, the heat from the vent washing over your face, and for a fleeting moment the world of the workshop and the cold streets fades away. You are just a human being, standing in the path of a warmth that you cannot afford to buy. The baker doesn't look up, and the door slams shut, cutting off the scent. The cold rushes back in, more aggressive than before. You continue walking, your heart sinking into your stomach. You realize that you have made a calculation error. You spent a halfpenny more than you intended yesterday on a bit of tallow for your candle, and now that midday meal is in jeopardy. Will you have to skip it? Can you survive 6 more hours of labour on an empty belly? The prospect is terrifying. Your hands, already stiff from the freezing air, seem to cramp at the mere thought of holding a tool without the promise of that brief respite. This is the cruelty of the 1880s for the working class. The weather is not an inconvenience. It is a constant, looming threat. It dictates how much you can do, how much you can eat, and how long you will last. The city around you is oblivious. The carriages of the wealthy passing by with their occupants wrapped in furs and wool, their breath not visible in the air of their heated cabins. You are a different species to them, a creature of the elements left to navigate the frost and the hunger as best you can. You press on, your boots crunching on the thin layer of ice forming on the cobbles, your eyes scanning the horizon for the first sign of the factory's smoke, the only place where the air, while thick with dust, is at least not frozen. Your route to the warehouse takes you past a section of the city that feels like a different planet. Here the streets are wider, the fog is managed by more efficient gas lights, and the shop windows are bright, glowing displays of opulence. You stop in front of a high-end grocer, your breath fogging the glass, and stare at the contents inside. There are mounds of golden butter, wheels of cheese that look like small sun-drenched islands, and sides of bacon that shimmer with a richness you have only ever known in dreams. There are tins of preserves, jars of fruit, and loaves of bread that are so white and airy they look like clouds. You stand there for a moment, a dishevelled figure in a tattered soot-stained coat, your stomach making a hollow protesting sound that you try to suppress with a hand pressed against your ribs. The contrast is dizzying in your world. A single penny is the difference between life and the abyss. Here, the amount of money spent on a single afternoon tea for a wealthy family could likely feed your entire tenement for a month. You aren't envious in the way that leads to anger. You are too tired for anger. You are filled with a deep existential confusion. How can one city hold so much excess and so much starvation at the same time? How can the world justify the labour that produces the wealth for these shelves while denying the labourer the very food they sell? A carriage clatters past, the horse's hooves striking the cobbles with a rhythmic, expensive sound. A woman in a silk dress steps out, her face shielded by a veil, her gloved hand resting lightly on the arm of her escort. She doesn't see you. You are as invisible to her as the grime on the brickwork. And in that realization you feel a strange cold clarity. You are not meant to be a part of this world. You are the shadow that makes their light seem brighter. You are the mechanism that makes their ease possible. You pull your gaze away from the window, the image of the golden butter seared into your memory like a branding iron. You start walking again, the weight of the realization pressing down on your shoulders more heavily than the physical burden of the day. You are heading back to the dust, the noise, and the repetitive, numbing labour of the boot-finishing bench. The hunger is still there, sharper now, fuelled by the sight of all that food you will never taste. You wonder if the people inside the shop ever think about the hands that made the goods they buy, or if they too believe that the products simply appear by magic, untainted by the struggle of the hungry. You don't have the answer, and as you turn the corner into the familiar gloom of the East End, you realise that you don't even have the time to look for one. You have work to do, always, forever, the work. The afternoon is a vast grey expanse of time where the clock seems to have stopped altogether. Inside the workshop, the heat has become oppressive, a thick stagnant layer of air that tastes of dust and old leather. You're at the epicentre of the production line. Your hands move with a mechanical jerky rhythm that is no longer entirely under your control. Every stitch, every pull of the waxed thread requires a conscious effort of will, a silent command from your brain to your fingers that feels like trying to move a heavy stone. You haven't eaten since that thin, watery soup last night, and the hunger has shifted from a physical sensation into a strange, buzzing fever in your mind. The sounds of the workshop are changing. The thwack-thwack of the hammers, which usually provides a steady, predictable background, now sounds like a heartbeat. The hiss of the gas jet seems to whisper your name. You look at the pile of leather on your bench, and for a split second you think it's moving, undulating like a living creature in the dim, flickering light. You blink hard, trying to clear the haze, but the vision persists. This is the delirium of the malnourished. You are light-headed, your pulse thrumming in your ears, and your sense of time is fraying at the edges. You know that if you lose focus now, you will ruin a piece of leather, and if you ruin the leather, you pay for it. The fear is the only thing keeping you tethered to reality. You bite the inside of your cheek, the sharp, metallic taste of blood grounding you for a moment. The master of the workshop walks past, his boots clicking on the floorboards with a sharp, authoritative sound. He stops behind you, watching. You can feel the weight of his gaze on the back of your neck. You don't look up. You just drive the needle through the stiff hide with a desperate, frantic strength. You are performing a dance of survival, a high-stakes performance where the audience is a cruel taskmaster and the prize is just enough copper to survive until tomorrow. Your neighbour, the man with the dye-stained hands, lets out a low, involuntary moan as he hunches over his work. He doesn't look at you, but you feel a kinship in that sound, a shared recognition that you are both reaching the breaking point. You wonder how much more the human body can take before it simply shuts down, like a machine that has been pushed past its limits. But you have no choice. The machine keeps running, and you must keep pace. The rhythm of the work is relentless, a metronome counting down the hours of your life, one stitch at a time. The air feels thinner, the light more jaundice-coloured, and the only thing that matters is that you keep moving. If you stop, you vanish. If you keep going, you survive, even if survival is just another word for continuing to suffer. The sound of the whistle, when it finally tears through the stifling air of the workshop, is like a gunshot. It breaks the hypnotic, feverish spell of the afternoon. For a heartbeat, there is absolute silence. Then the frantic, scraping sound of 30 people pushing back their wooden benches fills the room. It is not the sound of freedom, it is the sound of a transition. The labour is done, but the exhaustion has only just begun to truly settle into your bones. You stand up, your knees buckling slightly, and the world tilts for a second. You wait for the dizziness to subside, watching the others file out of the workshop like tired grey ghosts. You join the queue at the door, stepping out into the evening air. It is freezing, but the cold feels like a relief compared to the suffocating heat of the interior. Outside, the streets of Whitechapel have transformed. Thousands of workers, just like you, have been released from their factories and workshops at the same time. The narrow streets are a sea of caps, shawls and drab, woolen coats. The sheer volume of people is overwhelming. You are jostled, pushed and swept along in the current of humanity. You hear the clatter of carts, the shouting of street vendors trying to peddle the last of their wilted greens and questionable meats, and the low rhythmic murmur of 1,000 tired conversations that you cannot quite hear. Yet, despite the chaos, there is an eerie, pervasive loneliness. You look at the faces around you and you see the same reflection of your own state. Eyes that are glassy and unfocused, shoulders that are permanently hunched, and a gait that is heavy and spiritless. No one makes eye contact. To look into another person's eyes is to see the mirror of your own misery, and none of you are ready to acknowledge that. You are all navigating the same dark tunnel, side by side, yet light years apart. You find yourself drifting toward the familiar dim light of the eel stall you visited before. The vendor is still there, his hands moving with the same mechanical indifference. You feel the coins in your pocket, the final tally of your 10 hours of labour. It is a pitiful amount. You think about the path home, the dark, damp stairs of the lodging house, and the thin, scratchy blanket that awaits you. The crowd surges around you, an unstoppable force, and for a moment you feel like a leaf caught in a storm. You are part of this great industrial organism, this city that never stops, yet you feel entirely peripheral to its success. You are the invisible thread that holds the fabric together, destined to fray and be replaced, ignored by the very history you are helping to write. You grip your meagre meal, a cold, simple thing, and let the crowd carry you further into the dark, your mind already beginning the nighttime calculation, how to make this last until the sun rises again. Back in the corner of your dormitory, with the gas lamp hissing and flickering overhead, you engage in the nightly ritual that defines your remaining shreds of humanity, the mending. You pull a small rusted needle from a scrap of cloth and a length of coarse dark thread from your pocket. Your coat, which once might have been a decent garment, is now more patches than original fabric. A square of heavy canvas on the elbow, a strip of woolen rag inside the cuff, a jagged seam running down the shoulder, every stitch is a battle against the inevitable decay of your existence. This is your patchwork dignity. You know that out there in the wider world beyond Whitechapel, appearance is everything. A man in a clean collar and a well-mended jacket is treated with respect. A man in rags is treated like a threat or a nuisance. You are terrified of the day when the fabric will give way completely, when the patches will no longer hold the structure together. To be seen in public without these makeshift repairs is to announce to the world that you have finally failed, that you have hit the absolute bottom of the social order. As you pull the thread through the thick material, your fingers, rough, stained with leather dye and grime, work with a surprising practiced delicacy. You aren't just sewing, you are reinforcing your armour. Each stitch is a small defiance against the cold, a way to maintain the illusion that you are still a person, not just a labouring animal. The thread cuts into your skin, but you don't feel it. The numbness has become your constant companion. Nearby, a man is doing the same, his face illuminated by the weak light, his brow furrowed in concentration. You don't speak, but for a moment your eyes meet. In that brief, silent exchange there is a recognition of the shared burden. You are both weavers of your own survival, trying to hold your lives together with the thinnest of threads. The room around you feels smaller, the air more suffocating, as you realize that this is a silent, nightly ceremony performed by thousands of others across the city. You finish the last knot and bite the thread, the sharp snap echoing in the room. You smooth the patch with your palm, checking the seam. It will hold for another day, maybe two. It is enough. You lay your coat over the end of the bed, a folded map of your own endurance. You lie down, the straw mattress crinkling beneath you, and stare into the shadows. You think about the people who made the fabric, the people who owned the shops, and the people who walk the streets in clothes that never need mending. You wonder if they know how much effort goes into simply looking like a human being in the East End. You pull the thin, scratchy blanket up to your chin, the smell of damp and dust once again filling your lungs, and wait for the brief, dreamless sleep that is the only true escape from the arithmetic of the day. As you lie on the hard, narrow cot, your body finally surrenders to the physical exhaustion, but your mind refuses to follow suit. Instead, it enters a state of restless, haunting hyperactivity. This is the fever of arithmetic, a state of mind that haunts almost everyone living on the edge of starvation in this district. You're not thinking about the beauty of the city or the possibilities of a different life. You are trapped in a relentless, agonizing cycle of internal accounting. Your brain becomes a cold, unyielding ledger, constantly recalculating the cost of your existence in a world that seems to demand more than you can possibly give. The arithmetic is pervasive. You start with the most basic variables: 4p for the bed, 1 halfpenny for the morning bread, 1 penny for the evening soup, and perhaps another halfpenny for the coal or a candle to see by. You add them up in the dark, the numbers dancing behind your eyelids like malevolent spirits. If you earn 6p, you are left with exactly half a penny. What does that halfpenny represent? It is not just money, it is safety. It is the buffer against a disaster, a torn pair of boots, a rise in the price of bread, or a day lost to illness. If you lose that halfpenny, you are exposed. If you spend it on a momentary comfort, you are reckless. The madness of it lies in the precision required. You aren't just managing money, you are managing the microscopic degradation of your own life. You wonder, with a sudden surge of cold dread, what happens when the math stops working. What happens when the wage remains the same but the price of bread creeps up by a farthing? What happens when your fingers slow down and your daily piecework drops from 12 to 10? The ledger in your head doesn't have an answer for that. It only spirals into deeper, more terrifying configurations. You start to see your life not as a series of experiences, but as a series of costs. How much does it cost to stand? How much does it cost to breathe the smoke-filled air? How much does it cost to remain silent while the world around you demands your labour? The sound of the lodging house, the ragged breathing of the man next to you, the distant muffled shouting from the street below, begins to bleed into these calculations. You wonder if they are doing the same thing. You suspect that everyone in this room, everyone in this building, and everyone in this entire block is lying awake, their minds burning with the same desperate tally. We are a city of accountants, you realise, but our currency is not gold or silver. It is the raw burning calories of our own bodies and the finite dwindling seconds of our remaining lives. This obsession with the cost of survival creates a unique kind of isolation. You can't share these thoughts with anyone, because to admit how closely you are hovering over the abyss is to invite judgment or worse, pity. You keep the numbers locked away, a private, painful hoard of data that confirms your insignificance. You feel the crushing weight of the system, a massive, faceless entity that doesn't care if you live or die, provided the ledger balances at the end of the day. And the ledger always balances. Someone else is always getting richer on the margins of your poverty. You drift into a fitful, shallow sleep, your last conscious thought being a desperate, looping prayer that tomorrow you will earn just enough to cover the math. The cycle is absolute. It is the heartbeat of Whitechapel, a rhythm of coins clinking in the dark, and it is the only melody you will ever truly know. The tragedy is not just that you are poor. The tragedy is that your poverty has been codified, measured and extracted until there is nothing left of you but the numbers flickering like ghosts in the cold, unyielding silence of the night. The transition from the relative, albeit damp, warmth of your bed to the bone-chilling air of the early morning workshop is a shock to the system that never fully dulls, no matter how many times you endure it. You arrive at the workshop while the city is still shrouded in a thick, sulphurous blanket of fog. The iron gate groans as you pull it open, and the smell that greets you is a sensory assault, a mixture of rancid animal glue, damp leather, industrial coal dust, and the stale, lingering presence of 50 people who have been sweating in this space for months on end. You walk to your bench, your footsteps echoing hollowly against the uneven, grime-coated floorboards. The tools are waiting for you, laid out with a cold metallic precision. Your primary tool is an awl, a sharp, pointed spike of steel used for punching holes in the heavy cowhide. In the winter, the metal is so cold that if you touch it with your bare skin for too long, it feels as though it is biting into you, leaving behind a faint, stinging numbness. You wrap a piece of thin, oily rag around the handle to provide a meagre layer of insulation. This is your reality. You are spending the best hours of your life protecting your skin from the tools that are the very source of your survival. The supervisor, a man who moves with the heavy predatory gait of someone who has spent his life enforcing the will of others, walks down the aisle. He doesn't look at faces, he looks at output. He stops beside you, his shadow falling over your workspace like a shroud. He glances at the pile of finished soles near your feet, his eyes narrowing as he mentally calculates the pace. There is no praise in his world, only the absence of criticism. If he says nothing, you have succeeded. If he pauses, you are in danger. Your heart hammers against your ribs, a frantic, irregular beat as you focus intensely on the leather, your eyes stinging from the effort of maintaining such pinpoint accuracy in the dim, flickering light of the gas lamps that hang from the rafters like iron spiders. You begin the process of lusting. You must pull the leather tight over the wooden mould of the boot, driving the brass tacks home with a rhythm that must never falter. Thwack, thwack, thwack. If you miss the nail, you bend the brass, and the piece is ruined. If you pull too hard, the leather tears, and you are docked a portion of your already meagre pay for the wasted material. Your body is a series of interconnected pains. Your shoulders are perpetually knotted, a hard, painful mass of muscle that pulses with a dull, throbbing ache. Your fingers are calloused to the point of turning white, and the skin around your fingernails is cracked and permanently stained with the black dye of the leather. You watch the dust motes dancing in the singular, narrow beam of light that has managed to pierce through the high, soot-streaked window. It is a moment of strange, detached observation. You are a human being, a creature of flesh and bone, yet you are operating at the speed of a steam-powered machine. You are losing your hearing to the constant cacophony of hammers. You are losing your lung capacity to the fibres of leather floating in the air. You are losing your vision to the incessant strain of fine, intricate detail in the gloom. You are being consumed, layer by layer, by the very work that promises to keep you alive for one more day. And yet there is a strange hypnotic comfort in the repetition. As long as you are working, you don't have to think. As long as you are working, you are not failing. You are simply a component, a necessary, replaceable, an entirely ignored part of the vast grinding machinery of the Victorian Industrial Revolution. The morning stretches into hours. The hours blend into a blur of black leather and sharp steel, and you continue to pull, to punch, and to hammer, your soul slowly receding into the background, leaving only the worker behind. The exit from the factory is not merely a departure, it is an entry into a different kind of combat. As you spill out onto the street, you are immediately enveloped by the twilight bazaar of Whitechapel. This is the hour of the costermongers, the street vendors whose carts are laden with the remnants of the day's markets. The air is thick, not just with the usual fog, but with the pungent, heavy aroma of overripe produce, salted fish and grease, the scent of goods that are nearing their expiration, and therefore for a fleeting hour become affordable to the likes of you. You move through the crowd, your eyes darting from stall to stall, your mind once again activating the internal calculator. You are looking for the lucky find. Perhaps there is a barrow of potatoes that have been bruised and discarded by the West End grocers, or a crate of herrings that have been salted to hide their advancing decay. The vendors shout in a rapid-fire, rhythmic slang that acts as a language of the desperate. They know their audience. They see the hollowed-out faces of the workers, the desperate, hungry intensity in our eyes, and they adjust their prices with a predatory intuition. You stop before a barrow piled high with cabbage, leaves that are yellowed and wilted, riddled with the telltale holes of pests. The vendor is a man whose face is a roadmap of scars and bad weather. He tosses a head of cabbage in the air, catching it with a practiced, mocking ease. Fresh from the docks, he bellows, even though both of you know the cabbage has likely been sitting in a damp cellar for 3 days. You haggle, not because you have a choice, but because the ritual of negotiation is the only agency you have left. You offer a farthing less than the asking price, your voice raspy from a day of breathing leather dust. He sneers, but then he sees the look in your eyes, a look that isn't anger, but a profound, weary resignation. He relents, tossing the cabbage into your hand. It feels heavy and cold, a soggy, limp object that will be the centerpiece of your evening meal. As you walk away, clutching your prize, you pass other stalls where the items are even more questionable. There are trays of jellied eels that have begun to turn a cloudy greyish hue, and bowls of whelks that are swimming in their own briny sludge. There is a sense of impending disaster in the air. If you eat this, you might wake up with a fever. If you don't eat, you will definitely wake up with a hunger that will make your hands shake too much to work. It is a gamble with your own anatomy. You watch a group of children scavenge near a fish stall, picking up the discarded heads and tails of cod, their movements quick and furtive like small animals. They are the future of this district, you realize with a cold, sinking feeling in your gut, and they are learning to survive on the very things that the rest of the world refuses to touch. The bazaar is a chaotic symphony of the discarded. Every transaction is a small, quiet tragedy. You see a woman bargaining for a crust of bread that is so hard it would need to be soaked in water for an hour to be edible. You see a man staring at a piece of meat that looks suspiciously like horse, his face twisted in a conflict between disgust and the overwhelming physiological demand for protein. You realize that you are not just buying food, you are participating in a system that thrives on your fragility. The vendors, the buyers, the discarded produce, you are all part of an ecosystem of survival, a circular economy of decay, where the only thing that truly circulates is the hunger itself. You pull your coat tighter against the biting wind, tuck the wilted cabbage into your pocket, and navigate your way toward the lodging house, your mind already planning the next step, how to cook this meagre, wretched vegetable in a communal kitchen that is already overcrowded and filled with the scent of a dozen other desperate dinners. The work of the day is over, but the labour of life is only beginning. You push open the heavy, grime-encrusted door of the lodging house, and you are immediately hit by a wall of air that is distinct, thick, and suffocating. It is a dense cocktail of smells, damp wool, unwashed bodies, the acrid bite of cheap shag tobacco, and the underlying metallic scent of the coal smoke that permeates everything in the East End. In the dim, flickering light of a single sputtering gas jet in the hallway, you see the true anatomy of this place. It is not just a building, it is a stack of human misery arranged in rows of wooden frames, each holding a straw mattress that has been slept on by thousands before you. You make your way toward the staircase, the wood groaning and shifting beneath your weight as if it too is exhausted by the constant movement of the desperate. Every step you take is a labour. Your feet, encased in boots that have long since lost their original shape, feel like heavy lead weights. You aren't just moving through space, you are wading through the sediment of a day that refuses to end. You pass a door left slightly ajar, revealing a room where the air is so thick with humidity that it has turned to condensation on the walls. Inside, the sound is a symphony of suffering, a cacophony of deep, hacking coughs, the occasional low moan of someone in pain, and the restless, rhythmic shifting of bodies trying to find a position that doesn't ache. You finally reach your own spot, a narrow corner bunk that is perpetually cold because of the cracks in the brickwork behind it. You don't have the energy to undress completely. You simply unbuckle your belt and kick off your boots, the leather hitting the floorboards with a dull final thud. You sit on the edge of the mattress, your hands resting on your knees, and for a moment you just stare into the darkness. There is no privacy here. Your life is lived in the company of strangers, all of whom are variations of your own broken image. You can hear the man in the bunk above you whispering to himself, a low, rapid, incoherent murmur that might be a prayer or a protest. It doesn't matter which in this place, the gods seem to have forgotten the address. The silence of the room is deceptive. It is never truly quiet. There is the constant scratching sound of vermin in the walls, a sound that used to make you jump, but now you have learned to ignore it. It is just another background noise in the architecture of your existence. You take a moment to look at your hands in the darkness, the faint light from the street casting long, distorted shadows across your skin. You see the deep, ingrained grime, the scars from the needles, the calluses that have grown over other calluses. You are physically becoming a part of the workshop, a living piece of machinery that is being filed down by the friction of daily labour. You lay back, the straw mattress crunching loudly beneath your weight. It is a poor excuse for a bed, offering no support, but your body is so depleted that it feels like the most luxurious thing you have ever known. As you pull the thin grey blanket up, you notice a small dark stain on the fabric. A reminder that this bed and this life belong to no one. You are merely passing through this existence, a brief, flickering light before being extinguished. You close your eyes and the hunger returns, a dull, gnawing pressure in the pit of your stomach, a reminder that the cabbage you ate was not enough. You don't fight it. You drift into that thin, fragile state between wakefulness and oblivion, where the numbers stop dancing and the reality of the day finally blurs into a dreamless void. Tomorrow the whistle will blow. Tomorrow the iron will be cold. Tomorrow the ledger will be waiting. But for now you are still. For now you are silent, for now you have survived. You wake up, but the sensation is not one of rejuvenation. It is as if you have been pulled out of a deep, dark well, your mind still covered in the silt of whatever nightmares you inhabited during the night. You look at your hands in the dim light of dawn, and for a terrifying, fleeting moment, they do not feel like yours. They are just objects, long, scarred, ink-stained instruments of labour that have been grafted onto your wrists. You try to remember the sound of your own name, the way it felt to be called by it, but the memory is slippery, like a wet stone in a rushing stream. It is being washed away by the sheer repetition of the work, by the anonymity of the dormitory, and by the relentless, crushing weight of the East End. This is the most dangerous stage of your decline, the dissolution of the self. You are no longer a person with a history, a family, or a future. You are a biological extension of the boot-finishing bench. Your brain has started to prioritize the sensory inputs of the workshop, the smell of tanning chemicals, the texture of cowhide, the rhythmic thwack of the hammer. Above all else, everything else is becoming a blur. The faces of the other workers are shadows. The faces of the people you pass on the street are ghosts. Even the concept of home has shrunk to the exact dimensions of your mattress in the lodging house. You find yourself walking to the workshop on autopilot. You don't consciously choose the route. You don't navigate the corners. Your feet simply know the path. Your mind, freed from the burden of decision-making, drifts into a hollow, empty space. You see a cat dart across the alley, a child begging for a penny, a carriage splashing mud onto your trousers. But these sights elicit no emotional response. You are a ghost inhabiting a shell, a hollow vessel drifting through the fog of London. The cruelty of this state is that you are perfectly functional, yet entirely absent. You can finish your quota. You can manage your farthings. You can even maintain the appearance of normalcy, while deep inside, the flicker of your personality is dimming, pushed to the very edge of your consciousness. You reach the factory gates and join the queue. The man ahead of you is coughing, a deep, wet, rattling sound that suggests his lungs are filling with the leather dust he has inhaled for years. You look at him, and you feel nothing, no pity, no fear, not even a flicker of camaraderie. You're already beginning to see others as objects, as gears that are wearing out, as obstacles in the flow of the production line. This is the ultimate victory of the machine. It doesn't just exhaust your body, it colonizes your mind. It strips away your empathy, your curiosity, and your sense of self-worth until there is nothing left but the raw, brutal efficiency of a tool. You stand at your bench and pick up the awl. The cold steel feels like an extension of your own nerves. You don't think about the boot, you don't think about the customer who will wear it. You just start, punch, pull, stitch. The rhythm takes over, and the world outside the workshop walls ceases to exist. You are a machine. You have achieved the perfect state of the Victorian labourer. You have become entirely replaceable, entirely efficient, and entirely empty. You look at your neighbour, who is also working in the same dazed rhythmic trance, and you realize with a cold, detached clarity that you are both dead. You are simply waiting for your bodies to catch up to the state of your souls. You continue the work, the silence inside you deeper and more profound than the smog-filled streets of London, and you wait for the whistle to blow, though you no longer know what you're waiting for when it finally does. There is a hollow space at the bench across from you. It has been empty for 3 days now. The man who used to sit there, the one with the nervous twitch in his left eyelid and the coat that was constantly unravelling at the seams, has simply stopped appearing. Nobody asks where he went. Nobody dares to inquire, because to ask is to draw attention to the fragility of your own place in this row of benches. The supervisor moved his stool to the end of the line, and the space was filled by a new face within the hour. The machine continues to consume, and it does not mourn its components. You find yourself staring at that empty spot during the rare moments when your hands cramp and you are forced to pause. You wonder if he died in the street, huddled against a brick wall in the freezing rain, or if he finally gave up the fight and drifted into the night, seeking the relative comfort of the workhouse or the river. The reality of Whitechapel is that you can vanish without a trace, erased from the world as cleanly as a pencil mark on a slate. You are here one day, shivering and calculating your farthings, and the next you are just a memory, or worse, a gap in the production line that is swiftly occupied by someone else. The others in the shop act as if nothing has changed. They keep their eyes fixed on their leather, their hammers striking in that relentless, soul-crushing tempo, but you can feel a shift in the air, a subtle thickening of the dread. Each of us knows that we are playing the same game, and the rules are rigged against us. The vacancy across from you is a silent reminder of the inevitable conclusion of our arithmetic. You are not a human being with a story. You are a temporary occupant of a seat that will eventually be emptied. The thought is not frightening anymore. It is just a cold, logical certainty. At the end of the day, as you walk out into the thick, yellow fog, you pass a man slumped in a doorway. He is motionless, his hat pulled low over his eyes. You don't stop. You don't check to see if he is breathing. To stop is to risk your own equilibrium, to invite the reality of death into your own carefully maintained bubble of survival. You just keep walking, your boots clicking on the wet cobbles, your eyes locked onto the pavement. You have become an expert in the art of the ignored. You see the suffering of others, but you have no more room in your mind for it. Your empathy has been traded, bit by bit, for the strength to complete your own quota. The city swallows the missing without a sound. There are no obituaries for the men who finish boots in Whitechapel. There is only the ledger, the tally of hours worked, and the coins that are paid out, just enough to ensure that the next shift is filled. As you turn the corner and the familiar damp stench of your lodging house fills your nose, you realize that you're not even afraid of the end. You are only afraid that when you go there will be no one to mark your passing, not even a momentary silence in the workshop. You will simply be replaced. The tools will be wiped clean of your sweat, and the machine will continue to strike, louder and faster than before, indifferent to the fact that you ever existed at all. The thought leaves you feeling lighter, strangely untethered, as if you have already begun to fade into the smog that clings to the skin of this heartless city. Payday in Whitechapel is not a celebration. It is a ritual of humiliation. It arrives at the end of the week, a Friday evening when the light is already failing, casting long bruised shadows across the factory floor. You stand in a queue that snakes through the narrow, suffocating aisle, a line of ghosts waiting for the privilege of being compensated for their own erasure. The air is heavy with the smell of sweat and anticipation, not the kind of anticipation that brings joy, but the gnawing, anxious tension of someone waiting for a verdict. When you finally reach the pay table, the supervisor sits behind a ledger, his face as blank and unyielding as the iron gates outside. He doesn't look at you. He looks at his calculations, your hours, your mistakes, the deductions for the rent of your bench, the fine for the leather you marred on Tuesday, and the advance you took for that stale bread on Wednesday. His pen moves with a scratchy clinical efficiency. You watch the numbers shrink. The amount you were promised at the start of the week is no longer the amount you are receiving. It is a smaller, thinner, pathetic sum that barely justifies the 5 days of agony you have endured. He slides a few coins across the scarred wood of the table. You pick them up. They feel unnervingly cold and light, as if they carry no value at all. You turn away immediately, clutching the coins in your pocket so tightly that the metal bites into your palm. You are surrounded by others who have just received their wages, and there is no talk, no laughter. Everyone is busy performing the same mental audit. Is it enough for the rent? Is there anything left for the coal? Will the debt collector be waiting at the door of the lodging house? You are all accountants of misery, clutching your meagre earnings as if they were life rafts in a sea of rising debt. The walk back to the lodging house feels different tonight. The city seems louder, more aggressive, as if it knows you have money in your pocket and is waiting for you to surrender it. You pass the public house, the warm light spilling out onto the street, the sound of laughter and clinking glasses calling to you with a siren song of oblivion. You feel the coins burning in your pocket, tempted by the thought of just one drink, just one moment of forgetting, but you keep walking. You know that if you go in, the rent won't be paid, and you will be out on the street by morning. This is the ultimate final trick of the Victorian machine. It leaves you just enough to survive, but never enough to live. It keeps you in a state of perpetual vibrating anxiety, forever one bad decision away from the abyss. When you reach the lodging house, the debt collector is indeed waiting, leaning against the doorframe, his ledger tucked under his arm like a dark, leather-bound Bible. You pay him without a word. The coins leave your hand, one by one, until your pocket is empty again. You have paid for another week of existence, another week of cold, another week of hunger, another week of stitches. You walk up the stairs, your limbs trembling with a mixture of exhaustion and a strange hollow rage. You look at your empty palms. You have given your entire week to the system, and in return you have nothing but the right to remain here for 7 more days. You lie down on your mattress, the coins gone, the debt settled, and the cycle perfectly, cruelly reset. You are back at 0, you are ready for Monday. The machine is satisfied, and you are left with nothing but the silence of the room and the knowledge that next week the math will start all over again. Sunday is the most dangerous day of the week. For 6 days, the rhythm of the workshop provides a structure to your existence. The necessity of labour acts as a shield against the existential void. But on Sunday, the silence descends upon Whitechapel, and it is a heavy, deafening thing. The factories are still, the hammers have ceased their rhythmic heartbeat, and you're left alone with the one thing you have spent all week trying to escape, yourself. You wake up, but there is no whistle to drive you out of the bed. You lie on your mattress, staring at the ceiling, listening to the unfamiliar stillness of the room, without the immediate burning necessity of a quota to meet. Your mind begins to wander, and it goes to places you usually forbid it to visit. You think about the life you might have lived, the possibilities that withered away before you even had the chance to grasp them. You think about the sheer improbable tragedy of being a human being reduced to an instrument of production. For the first time all week, the physical pain in your muscles recedes just enough to allow the pain in your spirit to come forward. You eventually rise, not because you have to, but because the stillness is suffocating. You walk out into the streets, which are transformed by the lack of commerce. The usual frantic clatter of carts is replaced by the slow, shuffling footsteps of men and women who, like you, don't know what to do with their hands when they aren't holding an awl or a hammer. You see them gathered on the street corners, staring at nothing, their expressions blank, their postures slumped in a permanent bow to the weight of their own lives. We are all waiting for something, but we don't know what it is. We are a congregation of the hollowed out gathering in the cold grey light of a day that offers no salvation. You find yourself walking toward the river, where the fog is even thicker, clinging to the water like a shroud. You lean against the damp railing of a bridge and look down at the dark, swirling current of the Thames. It is the city's great artery, carrying away the filth and the secrets of millions. For a moment, you feel a seductive pull toward that darkness, the promise of an absolute final silence where no more calculations are required, where no more quotas need to be filled, and where the arithmetic of survival finally ceases to matter. It is a quiet, peaceful thought, far less terrifying than the prospect of facing another Monday morning. But then you pull yourself back. You realize that you're still here, you're still breathing, you're still in some inexplicable, stubborn way alive. And in that realization there is a flicker of something you haven't felt in months, a faint, smouldering ember of defiance. You may be a gear in their machine, you may be a ghost in their streets, but you are still you. You turn away from the river, the cold wind whipping your thin coat around your body, and you begin the walk back to the lodging house. Tomorrow the whistle will blow, tomorrow the iron will be cold, But today, for a few precious fleeting hours, you have existed outside of the system. You have looked into the void and you haven't blinked. You walk back into the gloom of the East End, not as a machine, but as a person, carrying the weight of your own existence with a newfound terrifying clarity. The Sabbath is ending and the cycle is about to resume, but you are changed. You know the truth now. You are the history that they will never write, the heartbeat that they will never hear, and the soul that they could never quite manage to crush. The transition from the relative introspection of Sunday to the harsh reality of Monday is not a gradual process. It is a violent collision. The morning whistle which screams through the stagnant air of Whitechapel at an hour when the stars are still fighting the dawn acts as a physical blow. It cuts through the fragile, newfound clarity you cultivated by the river, shredding it like dry parchment. You are jolted awake, your heart hammering against your ribs, and for one agonizing second you are confused. You don't know where you are or why your life feels like a sentence being served. Then the cold reality sets in, the damp smell of the lodging house, the aching stiffness in your joints, and the relentless mechanical call of the whistle. You move with a grim, practiced efficiency. You don't linger in the cold, you don't look for the light, you simply dress and step into the queue. The streets are already filling with the same grey tide of humanity, all of us heading toward the same iron gates. We are walking in the same patterns, our heads bowed against the wind, our eyes fixed on the cobbles. The Sabbath, with its brief moment of reflection and its glimpses of the void, is gone. It was a dream, a flicker of light in a long sunless tunnel, and now the darkness has returned to claim its territory. As you step into the factory, the heat hits you, a thick stale wall of air that tastes of leather dye and despair. You walk to your bench, and your hands move to your tools with an autonomy that borders on the uncanny. You don't need to think. Your muscles remember the exact pressure required to pull the needle, the exact angle at which to strike the hammer. You are not a human being anymore. You are a component of the workshop's nervous system, but something is different today. Deep beneath the surface of your exhaustion, there is a stubborn, flickering ember of that Sunday defiance. You watch the supervisor as he patrols the floor, his eyes darting from face to face, searching for a sign of weakness or dissent. He stops at your bench, his shadow hovering over you like an encroaching night. He stares at the work on your lap, looking for an error, a flaw, a reason to dock your pay. You don't look up, but you feel the heat of his gaze. You know that if you show any sign of spirit, any flicker of intelligence that isn't focused on the leather, he will crush it. So you maintain the mask, you keep your eyes dull, your movements precise, your posture submissive, but inside you're calculating. You are not just counting farthings anymore, you're counting the seconds, the breaths, the stitches. You're observing the machine, watching the way it wears people down, noting the weaknesses in its armour. The rhythm of the work begins, the thwack, thwack, thwack of the hammers, sounding like the beating of a drum in the bowels of the city. You are in the belly of the beast, and the beast is feeding on your life. Yet as you drive the awl through the tough, unyielding hide, you feel a cold, sharp satisfaction. You are surviving. You have survived the Sabbath. You have survived the hunger, and you are surviving this moment. The machine is strong, the master is cruel, and the city is indifferent. But they have not broken the core of you. You are a secret observer in your own life, a witness to your own slow industrial destruction. And as long as you can observe it, as long as you can name it, they haven't completely won. You continue to stitch, your fingers bleeding into the leather, your mind a quiet, hidden fortress, waiting for the next moment of stillness in a world that refuses to offer any. The light in the workshop is a lie. It is a sickly, jaundiced yellow provided by gas jets that hiss and flicker like dying insects. You have spent months in this environment, and you have begun to notice a terrifying change in the way you perceive the world. When you step outside into the natural grey light of a London morning, the transition is agonizing. Your eyes, accustomed to the dim, oppressive interior of the factory, cannot adjust. Everything outside looks jagged, overexposed, and painful, as if the sun itself is an intruder in your carefully controlled darkness. But it is inside the workshop that the true degradation happens. You are working with fine threads and thick, dark leather, and you find that the lines are starting to bleed together. You reach for your awl, and for a split second, your hand misses the mark. You feel a surge of cold panic, not because you're tired, but because you are failing in your primary function. You rub your eyes, but the movement only smears the grime and the sweat across your lids. The world is becoming a watercolor of grey, brown, and black, a blurry landscape where the edges of reality are being erased. You know what this is. You have seen it happen to the older workers, the ones who have been here for years. Their eyes eventually turn a cloudy, milky shade, or they develop a permanent, frantic squint that makes them look like they are perpetually searching for something they have lost. You wonder how much longer you have before you too are cast aside, no longer useful to the machine because you can no longer see the line of the stitch. The thought is a dull ache behind your temples. Your vision is not just a biological faculty, it is your wage, your rent, your meal. To lose your sight is to lose your life. Sometimes when the work is particularly demanding, you find that your eyes play tricks on you. You see shapes moving in the periphery, phantom figures, shifting shadows, or the suggestion of a face where there is only a stack of hides. You realize that your brain, deprived of clear input, is inventing its own reality to fill the void. It is a desperate, hallucinating attempt to keep you alert. You try to focus on the leather, narrowing your gaze until your forehead burns with the effort, but the stitch you just made looks crooked. You stop your heart racing and you carefully pull the thread back out. You have to fix it. If the supervisor sees it, the penalty will be severe. You are a craftsman, or at least you were, before the factory took the grace out of your fingers and the light out of your eyes. Now you are just a slave to the blur. You wonder if the people who wear these boots, the wealthy individuals who stride across the clean pavements of the city, have any idea that the seams were stitched by a man who was fighting a war against his own sight. You imagine them walking, their feet comfortable and warm, oblivious to the tragedy of the eyes that crafted their comfort. As the day wears on, the blur deepens. The workshop begins to resemble a cavern, a subterranean tomb where the light goes to die. You keep your head down, your eyes locked onto the small dark space of the leather, your world shrinking until it is only as large as the next hole you must punch. You are moving through a haze, guided by memory and the relentless mechanical instinct of the machine, as the world you once knew fades into a shapeless monochromatic shadow. If your eyes are failing you, your ears have become hypersensitized to the cacophony of the factory. You have begun to categorize the sounds of the workshop not as noise, but as a relentless, discordant symphony that dictates your every movement. There is the low, ominous rumble of the steam-driven belt overhead, a sound that vibrates through the very floorboards and settles in your teeth. Then there is the sharp, staccato thwack of the hammers, the rhythmic hissing of the gas jets, and the occasional jarring screech of metal grating against metal when the machinery struggles to overcome the friction of the day. You have learned to hear the mood of the factory before you even enter it. You can tell if the foreman is in a foul humour by the way his boots strike the floor, and you can tell if the production line is lagging by the frantic, uneven tempo of the hammers. You're living inside a giant clockwork organism, and your own pulse has begun to synchronize with its gears. You find yourself breathing in time with the wheeze of the gas lamps, your heart skipping beats to match the erratic stutter of the heavy machinery. It is a form of assimilation. You are no longer an observer of the factory, you are a resonance chamber for its brutality. To protect your sanity, you have developed a secret, internal practice. During the moments when your work allows for a second of respite, you retreat into your acoustic memory. You close your eyes, or as much as your tired lids will allow, and you summon the sound of things that no longer exist in your current life. You try to remember the silence of a field at dusk, the gentle wind-rustled sound of wheat, or the soft liquid splash of a small creek. These sounds are becoming faint, like a memory of a dream, but you hoard them like precious jewels. They are your only connection to a reality where existence isn't measured in industrial decibels. However, the workshop is a jealous master. It demands your full attention, and it hates the silence you try to cultivate. Whenever you begin to lose yourself in those internal echoes, a machine will inevitably break down with a violent, deafening bang, or a supervisor will bellow an order that cuts through your sanctuary like a knife. The intrusion is painful. It feels like a physical violation of your inner space. You realize that the goal of this environment is not just to tire your body, but to colonize your mind so thoroughly that you no longer have the capacity to imagine a world beyond these walls. They want your focus to be as narrow as a needle's eye, and your inner world to be as noisy as the factory floor. You find yourself resenting the silence of the Sabbath more than ever now. On Sundays, the lack of sound feels like a void, an emptiness that is almost as heavy as the noise. You have become so accustomed to the roar of the machine that true silence feels like a symptom of something missing. It is a chilling realization. You are becoming a creature of the industrial age, a being who finds comfort in the grinding of iron and the hissing of gas. As the day reaches its peak, the noise swells to a crescendo. The workshop is a swirling vortex of sound, a tempest of human and mechanical exertion. You bow your head, your fingers moving with frantic, mechanical speed, and you hum a silent tune to yourself, a song you heard once, years ago, before the gears took over. You hum it against the roar, you hum it against the screech, and you hum it until your throat aches. It is a pathetic, tiny defiance, but it is the only thing that belongs solely to you. You are a captive of the symphony, but you are still, in your own broken way, trying to compose your own melody in the margins of the noise. In a place where speech is an unaffordable luxury, squandered breath that could be better spent on the rhythm of the work, we have developed a language of our own. It is a silent, desperate dialect written in the twitch of an eyelid, the slump of a shoulder, and the fleeting, involuntary glance toward the door. We are a collection of castaways crowded together on the same sinking ship, yet we are forbidden from acknowledging our shared predicament. To speak is to draw the attention of the supervisor. To connect is to admit that we are more than just tools. You become an expert in this non-verbal communication. You know that the woman at the bench behind you is failing today because her rhythm has lost its snap, her hammer strike is heavy, lethargic, landing a fraction of a second late. You don't need to ask her what is wrong. You know the weight of the grief she is carrying, or the hunger that has finally hollowed out her last reserve of energy. You offer her nothing but a steadying presence, your own work maintaining a sharp, unwavering tempo. It is a subtle, silent message. I am still here. We are both still here. Keep moving. There is a man near the end of the row, a veteran of this workshop, whose face is a road map of injuries. He is the one who keeps the order. When the supervisor is occupied, he will occasionally catch your eye and offer a minuscule, nearly imperceptible nod, a gesture that acknowledges the shared torture of the hour. It is a tiny, fragile bond, but in the sterile, hostile architecture of the factory, it is a lifeline. That single nod confirms that you are not losing your mind, that the suffering you feel is real, and that you are not entirely alone in the darkness. These interactions are the most dangerous and the most vital parts of your day. They are moments of subversion where we reclaim a shred of our humanity from the machinery that tries to strip it away. You see it in the way someone adjusts their apron for another, or the way a shared look of exhaustion passes between two people as they pass each other in the narrow aisle. It is a quiet, mourning language. We are all grieving, not just for the lives we left behind, but for the people we are becoming, hardened, callous, and fearful. As the sun begins to set, casting long, bruised shadows across the floorboards, the silence deepens. The collective rhythm of the room, the thwack, thwack, thwack of 30 hammers, becomes a mournful, hypnotic chant. You find yourself looking up, just for a second, catching the eye of a stranger across the room. There is a deep, profound sadness in their gaze, a mirror of the emptiness you feel in your own chest. We don't smile, we don't wave, we don't reach out. We simply acknowledge the weight, share the burden for a heartbeat, and return to the leather. We are like ships passing in a night of fog, each signalling to the other that we are still afloat, even as the cold black water of the Industrial Revolution threatens to pull us under. This is our resistance, the simple silent refusal to be entirely erased by the machines we serve. It is deep in the night, the hour when the gaslight seems to retreat, leaving the room in a spectral hollow gloom. Your body is a map of tremors, a collection of pulses that refuse to calm down, even though you have been lying on the straw mattress for hours. Sleep, the only mercy this life offers, has abandoned you tonight. Instead, you are cursed with a crystalline, painful clarity, the night of the waking dream. You stare at the rafters, your mind turning over the nature of what you do, what you create, and the silent, cold irony of your own existence. You think of the boots, thousands of them. You have stitched the leather, hammered the soles, and burnished the heels of boots that will walk through places you will never see. They will pace the polished halls of the wealthy. They will tread upon the velvet carpets of London's elite. They will walk through the pristine parks where the air is sweet and the silence is not a void, but a luxury. You have poured your own sweat, your own calloused blood, and the very minutes of your life into these objects. You are in every literal sense the foundation upon which their comfort is built. There is a bitter, sharp realization in this. You are creating a world you are strictly forbidden to enter. The more elegant the boot, the more delicate the stitch, the more hours of your life have been consumed to produce it. You are a ghost craftsman, weaving beauty and durability out of your own decay. You imagine a gentleman stepping into a pair of your finest creations, feeling the perfect fit, never knowing that those boots are stitched with the thread of your own exhaustion, held together by the quiet, desperate willpower of a man who hasn't eaten a full meal in days. You are a hidden architect of their ease, a secret partner in their luxury, and you are entirely, devastatingly invisible. You feel a strange, cold laughter rising in your chest, but you choke it back. In a room filled with sleeping, suffering men, it would sound like madness. The irony is too heavy to bear. Your poverty is the catalyst for their vanity. Your struggle is the unseen labor that keeps the wheels of their industry turning, ensuring they never have to look down at the ground they walk upon. You have become an expert in a craft that guarantees your own insignificance. You are the invisible thread, the nameless hand, the forgotten ghost of the East End. But as the first sickly grey light of dawn begins to bleed through the grime-coated windows, something shifts within you. You are no longer just a worker, and you are no longer just a victim. You are a witness. You hold the secret knowledge of the cost of their civilization. You know the price of every polished heel and every supple seam. You have paid for their walk through the world with the shortening of your own breath, and that gives you a grim, silent power that they can never possess. They walk in ignorance, but you walk, when you're allowed to walk, in the chilling, absolute truth. You sit up on the edge of the mattress, the straw crinkling with a sound like dry bones. You pull on your own boots, the worn, mended, pathetic excuses for footwear that define your own path. They are heavy, they are cold, and they are falling apart, but they are yours. And as the distant, mournful wail of the morning whistle begins to rise, signalling the start of another week, you stand up, you are ready. Not because you want to be, but because you're the one who knows the truth, and the truth requires a witness. You walk toward the door, your gait steady, your eyes fixed on the shadows, stepping out to face the machine once more. The transition back to the factory floor this Monday feels fundamentally different. The familiar rhythm of the machine is there. The stench of the leather is as cloying as ever, and the supervisor's shadow still stalks the aisles. Yet the fog in your mind has lifted, replaced by a cold, sharpened sense of purpose. You have realized that if you are to be consumed, you will not simply vanish, you will be a recorder. You have decided in the quiet fortress of your own consciousness that you are the witness of Whitechapel. Every motion you make, the punch of the awl, the pull of the thread, the hammering of the sole, is now a deliberate act of observation. You are no longer just making a boot, you are documenting the life of a worker. You memorize the way the light catches the dust motes at precisely 10 a.m., the exact frequency of the coughing fits that break out in the back rows, and the way the foreman's eyes glaze over when he talks about efficiency. You are collecting data on human survival, hoarding these sensory fragments as if they were gold coins in a hidden vault. You begin to notice things you previously overlooked, the way the light reflects off the rain-slicked cobblestones outside, creating an eerie, silver-grey mirror of the city, the specific vocabulary of the street urchins who scavenge for leather scraps, the way the older workers favour one leg over the other, a physical history of years spent standing at a bench. You are building an archive within your own mind. You're creating a map of this hell, cataloguing every crevice and corner so that, should you be replaced, at least a record of your existence will remain etched in the landscape of your memory. There is a grim, terrifying beauty in this new perspective. By deciding to be the witness, you have reclaimed a sliver of autonomy. The machine can take your labour, it can take your health, and it can take your time, but it cannot take the story you are now constructing. Every time you stitch a boot, you are stitching a narrative. Every time you swallow your anger, you are storing a piece of the truth. You are becoming more than just a labourer, you are becoming an archivist of the abyss. As the day nears its end, and the air becomes thick with the scent of coal and the exhaustion of the collective, you feel a strange, calm stability. The supervisor walks by, sneering at a seam, but it barely touches you. You aren't just here to work, you are here to observe. You watch him walk away, and you note the way his heel strikes the ground, arrogant, heavy, and oblivious. You file it away in the archive. You are learning to see the world not as a series of obstacles, but as a vast, unfolding story of suffering and resilience. You are the invisible scribe, the silent chronicler of the East End. And though you are still shackled to the bench, your mind has begun to wander far beyond the factory walls. You continue your work, your fingers dancing over the leather, a silent, unseen witness to a history that the world has decided to forget. To observe is one thing, to record is an act of rebellion. The realization hits you with the force of a physical blow. Memory is too fragile to trust. It is constantly being eroded by the sheer exhaustion of your daily life. If you are to be an archivist of this abyss, you must find a way to make your observations permanent. You start scanning the floor of the workshop with a new intent. You aren't looking for leather scraps or misplaced tools anymore. You're looking for anything that can serve as a medium for the truth. You find a discarded shard of a broken slate near the charcoal stove, and a short, stubby piece of lead from a carpenter's pencil that must have fallen from a passing foreman's pocket. These are your tools of subversion. You hide them in the deep, fraying lining of your coat, your heart hammering against your ribs like a trapped bird. The risk is immense. In this environment, anything that isn't a tool of production is considered contraband, a sign of a distracted and potentially dangerous mind. At the bench, in the rare moments when the rhythm of the work slows or the foreman's back is turned, you begin to scratch. You don't write words that would be too easy to decode if discovered. You develop a system of symbols, a shorthand of suffering, a jagged line for the cough that rattles through the room, a series of dots for the minutes spent waiting in the cold, a curved hollow shape for the feeling of hunger that gnaws at your gut. You carve these onto the inner surface of the thick leather offcuts, the parts of the hide that will be hidden deep inside the construction of the boot. It is a silent, secret book written in the very materials you are forced to process. You are embedding your history into the products of your own enslavement. You imagine, with a grim, secret smile, the day these boots are finally worn to pieces, years from now, perhaps in some grand house in the West End, and some future owner or cobbler pulls them apart, finding these strange, cryptic markings etched into the leather. They will never know the context. They will never know the name of the man who carved them, but they will be touching a ghost of the truth. The act of writing, even in this rudimentary, terrified way, changes you. It anchors your identity. You are no longer just a passive participant in the grinding of the city. You are a creator. You are documenting the reality of the 19th century labourer, one scratch at a time. The physical act of holding the pencil lead, the concentration required to mark the leather without being caught, creates a pocket of stillness around you. For those fleeting seconds, you are not a cog in the machine. You are an individual with a mission. You tuck the piece of leather, now bearing its silent, scarred testimony, into the pile of finished goods. It is a message in a bottle, cast into an industrial sea. You continue your work, your hands moving with renewed purpose, the secret burden of your archive heavy but glorious in your pocket. You are no longer just surviving. You are preparing to be remembered. The inner lining of your coat has become a heavy secret burden. It is no longer just a garment. It is a repository of forbidden knowledge. Each night, as you lie on your straw mattress in the lodging house, you carefully extract the pieces of leather you have managed to squirrel away. By the dim, flickering light of a street lamp filtering through the grime-streaked window, you trace the lines of your own shorthand. They are not just marks. They are stolen moments of reality, the exact sound of the foreman's boot, the specific shade of grey that the sky turned before the winter rain, the weight of the silence after a worker vanished. But with every scrap you add, the danger grows. You have become hyper-aware of the world around you. Every time the supervisor stops to adjust his coat, every time a co-worker glances in your direction, your heart leaps into your throat. You feel the physical weight of these scraps against your chest, a constant, jagged reminder that you are harbouring contraband. You are terrified of the simple, arbitrary movements of others, the way someone might accidentally bump your coat, or the way a suspicious guard might decide to conduct a random search of the dormitory. You have started to develop a kind of paranoia that is both exhausting and exhilarating. You watch the other men, the ones who shuffle, the ones who cough, the ones who stare at the floor, and you wonder if any of them possess a secret of their own. Could the man who works in the corner, the one who never speaks, be hiding something more profound than exhaustion? Is there a whole network of secret histories hidden beneath the grime of Whitechapel? Or are you the only one foolish enough to try to hold on to the truth? The isolation is absolute. You can share your burden with no one. To whisper a single word of your project is to invite the gallows or the workhouse. The work in the factory has become a high-stakes performance. You must act the part of the broken, mindless gear with perfection. You keep your head down, your movements lethargic, your eyes dull. But inside, your mind is a storm of activity, constantly monitoring the environment for threats. You have learned to read the rhythm of the workshop security, the way the guards circulate, the moments when their attention is occupied by a shipment of goods, the subtle shifts in the supervisor's mood. You are a spy in your own life, gathering intelligence on your own destruction. As you drift into a fitful, shallow sleep, the fear often manifests as a dream. The supervisor discovers your stash, his face twisting with a cold, triumphant smile as he drags you toward the door, your secret life scattered like autumn leaves on the factory floor. You wake up gasping, your hand instinctively clutching at your chest to ensure the scraps are still there. They are. The reality of your dangerous archive is still with you. It is a terrifying, lonely existence. But as you lie there in the dark, you realize that this fear is the most human thing you have felt in years. It is the fear of someone who has something to lose, something that matters more than the wages or the next meal. You are a criminal of memory, and as the morning whistle begins to moan in the distance, you prepare yourself for another day of acting the part of the hollow, all while guarding the truth that could burn your entire world to the ground. The calm you cultivated has been shattered. This afternoon the man at the bench next to yours, the one with the persistent rattling cough, finally collapsed. He didn't just stop working, he folded inward, his body hitting the floor with a dull, sickening sound that was momentarily drowned out by the mechanical roar of the workshop. The supervisor did not rush to help. He simply stopped, looked down at the man with an expression of profound annoyance, and barked at the nearest worker to drag the body into the alleyway so the production line could continue. The indifference was the sharpest blade of all. It wasn't the death itself. Death is the constant companion of these streets, but the casual, administrative ease with which a human life was erased from the ledger. You watched them move him, his limbs dangling like the limp leather you work with every day. You felt something inside you break, a dam of repression giving way to a flood of cold, white-hot fury. You didn't cry, you didn't shout, you didn't even stop your hands from stitching, but inside your mind was screaming. As soon as the supervisor moved to the far end of the shop, you pulled the lead pencil from your coat. Your hands were trembling, not with fear, but with a desperate, frantic energy. You took a piece of leather intended for the sole of a boot and began to carve not your usual shorthand, but deep, jagged, violent strokes. You were no longer documenting the environment, you were indicting it. You scratched the name of the man who died, the way he fell, the exact, dismissive look on the supervisor's face, and the precise time the whistle blew to signal the end of the shift. This was no longer an archive, it was a testament. You were committing the crime of witnessing to stone-cold reality. Every stroke of the pencil felt like a strike against the machine. You weren't just keeping a record, you were shouting into the void, ensuring that at least one truth survived the slaughterhouse of the factory. You didn't care about the risk anymore. If they caught you now, let them. You felt a terrifying, liberating sense of power that far outweighed the danger of discovery. When you tucked the leather away, your chest felt lighter, as if you had finally managed to deposit a portion of your soul into a safe harbour. The man's workspace was already occupied. A new, terrified face had been slotted into his seat within minutes, and the hammers were already back to their relentless, soul-crushing tempo. But you looked at the new worker, then at the empty spot on the floor where the blood had been hastily wiped away, and you felt a cold, unwavering resolve. You are the historian of the forgotten. You are the witness who will not close his eyes. The machine thinks it has won, but you have smuggled the truth into the very products they sell to the world, and as long as you hold that pencil, the machine is not the only thing that leaves a mark. The leather in your pocket feels like a burning coal, yet it is also the only source of warmth you have left, the act of recording that death has irrevocably altered the way you see your peers. Before you were one of them, a shared shadow in the gloom, a collective sigh in the dark. Now you feel a chasm opening up between you. They are still part of the machine, moving in its rhythm, desperately trying to forget the reality of the floorboards they stand upon. You, however, are now someone who remembers. You watch them as they return to their work after the incident. They have wiped the memory of the fallen man from their faces just as cleanly as they wiped the blood from the floor. They chat in hushed, nervous tones about their quotas, their farthings, the price of cabbage, the mundane arithmetic of survival. They are terrified of introspection, and for good reason. To think is to suffer, and to remember is to admit that the machine has already claimed you. They view any deviation from the rhythmic, soul-deadening labour as a threat to their precarious existence. You feel a profound, chilling isolation. You want to reach out to the woman at the next bench, to tell her what you saw, what you wrote, to show her that the man didn't just vanish into thin air, but you catch yourself. The look of blank, hollow terror in their eyes warns you off. If you speak, you become an anomaly. If you are an anomaly, you become a liability, and in this place liabilities are discarded with the same casual indifference as a frayed thread or a torn piece of hide. Your secret has become a wall separating you from the very people whose suffering you are documenting. You realize that the archive is not just a record of their lives, it is a monument to their tragedy, and they would likely fear it more than they would honor it. They want to believe that if they just keep their heads down, if they just work hard enough, they might survive. You know the truth that the machine does not negotiate, and it does not spare. By knowing this, you have stepped outside the circle of their comfort in ignorance. You are alone in the belly of the beast, the only one who knows exactly how fast the digestive juices are rising. As the day concludes and the factory empties, You walk out into the thick yellow London fog. You pass the same faces, the same slumped shoulders, the same vacant stares. You are surrounded by thousands of souls, yet you have never felt more singular. You are the keeper of the names, the chronicler of the ghosts. Your life has become a heavy, silent vigil. You clutch your coat tight against the damp night air, guarding the secret history that no one else wants to claim. You are a stranger in your own city, a man haunted by the present, marching toward a future that is already written in the ledgers you're documenting. The archive is safe, but it has cost you your place among the living. You walk on, a solitary witness in a world of sleeping ghosts. The air in the workshop usually reeks of leather and oil, but today it is suddenly sharp, with the scent of fear. A low, nervous murmur ripples through the benches, a sound you haven't heard in years. Then you see him, the head overseer, a man who rarely deigns to step onto the floor. He is flanked by two of his most brutal enforcers, and they are not walking. They are raiding. They are moving from bench to bench, demanding that workers stand, empty their pockets and turn out the linings of their coats. Your heart stops. It doesn't skip a beat. It simply ceases to function for a terrifying second. In your pocket, the scraps of leather feel like leaden weights. If they reach you, it is over. Not just the archive. You will be dragged to the gates. Your name will be scratched from the books, and you will be cast out into the winter fog without a farthing or a hope of work. You try to breathe, but your lungs are frozen. The enforcer is only 3 benches away. You look around, frantic for a solution. But the workshop is a cage with no exits. You cannot run. You cannot hide. You look at the leather pile in front of you, a chaotic stack of offcuts waiting to be sorted. A desperate, insane idea flashes through your mind as the overseer moves to the next bench. You shift your hand, with a motion so quick it is almost a blur. You slide the pieces of leather from your pocket and tuck them deep into the heart of a pile of raw, unworked hides. The enforcer arrives at your station. He towers over you, his face a mask of bored cruelty. He doesn't even look at you. He just holds out a hand, palm up. You stand, your legs trembling so violently that you have to lean against the bench to keep from collapsing. You turn your pockets inside out. Empty. You lift the flaps of your coat. Empty. He pats you down, his hands callous and rough, searching for anything, a hidden coin, a spare needle, a scrap of paper. He lingers over your chest, and for a moment you are certain he can hear the frantic thumping of your heart, a drumbeat of terror that must surely be audible to anyone in the room. He finds nothing. He grunts, a sound of disappointment, and pushes you aside to move to the next man. You collapse back onto your stool, the room spinning, your skin cold and slick with sweat. You have survived, but at what cost? Your archive is buried in a mountain of leather, indistinguishable from the thousands of other scraps in the factory. It is safe, but it is inaccessible. You are now a man without his history, a witness without his testimony, sitting in the heart of the beast, waiting for the moment when you can reclaim the truth. The machine rumbles on, oblivious to the fact that it has just been cheated of its most dangerous secret. You pick up your awl, your fingers still shaking, and you start to stitch, the silence in your mind screaming with the realization of how close you just came to the end. The pile of raw hides has been moved to the loading bay. You watch them go, your history, your protest, the names of the dead, shipped out to be cut into insoles for boots that will eventually find their way to the feet of people who will never know they are treading upon the truth. The loss is a physical ache, a hollow space in your chest where your purpose used to be. For hours you sat at your bench, the needle moving through the leather with a mechanical precision that felt more like a burial than a craft. But as the evening shadows stretched across the factory floor, a strange clarity began to take hold. You realized that the danger of the leather was always its tangibility. It could be found, it could be read, it could be destroyed. The moment you relied on a material object to hold your testimony, you made yourself vulnerable to the reach of the machine. The inspection proved that they can search your coat, they can empty your pockets, and they can scour your workspace, but they cannot penetrate the fortress of your own skull. You have begun to perform a new silent ritual. In the rhythmic thwack, thwack, thwack of the hammers, you start to reconstruct the archive. You recite the names of the departed in time with the strike of the tools. You visualize the exact shape of the symbols you used to scratch into the hide, etching them deeper and deeper into your own consciousness. You are building an internal library, a mental map of the abyss that no enforcer can ever raid. The archive is no longer a collection of scraps. It is now a part of your own nervous system. There is a terrifying liberation in this. You no longer fear the supervisor's hands or the unexpected inspection. You have become the container of the memory itself. If you die, the record dies with you. That is the weight of your responsibility. But while you live, you are the final absolute repository of the truth of this place. Every injustice you witness, every groan of exhaustion, every quiet defiance is being encoded into your memory, layer by layer, becoming as permanent as the scars on your hands. You look at the men around you, and for the first time you don't feel the need to show them anything. You don't need their validation or their understanding. You are the sole curator of this hidden history. You pick up the next piece of leather, your fingers steady, your gaze clear. The factory can own your labor for 12 hours a day, but it cannot own the witness. You are walking through the hell of the 19th century workshop, and you are taking it all with you, safe in the deepest recesses of your mind. The archive is gone, but the archivist is stronger than ever. The machine continues its roar, indifferent and cruel, but inside your head you are keeping the ledger of everything it has stolen. The loading docks are a flurry of activity this morning. Crates are being heaved onto carts, the heavy timber groaning under the weight of thousands of boots. I watch them go, these children of my labour, stacked in neat, suffocating rows. Among them are the hides I hid my writings within, those testaments I thought I had lost to the inspection, only to realise they were shipped out the very same hour. They are gone now, scattered to the corners of the city, and perhaps beyond. A strange, quiet peace washes over me. For so long I believed the archive needed to be a static object, a piece of leather kept in a pocket, a symbol scratched into a hide. I was wrong. The archive is not the leather, it is the active witness, and now it is moving. Those boots are carrying my history out of the darkness of Whitechapel and into the sunlight of the wider world. Whether the symbols I scratched are still legible, or whether the constant friction of 1,000 miles of walking has worn them into oblivion, it no longer matters. The intent has been embedded into the fabric of the city. I think of the people who will wear these boots, a clerk perhaps, hurrying to his desk in the city, a merchant pacing the floors of his warehouse, a traveller treading the dust of a foreign road. They will never know the hands that crafted their comfort. They will never feel the phantom pulse of my exhaustion in the soles beneath their feet, but there is a secret poetic justice in it. I have woven the reality of the abyss into the very foundations of their daily lives. They walk upon the truth of my existence, whether they choose to acknowledge it or not. I look at my hands, calloused, stained with dye and trembling slightly from the early morning chill. They are the instruments of this connection. Every stitch I have made is a thread linking the factory floor to the grand glittering world that believes itself separate from us. We are not separate. We are the fuel, the foundation, and the silent partners of their civilization. My archive has become mobile, a subterranean history that travels under the soles of the elite, slowly absorbing the grime and the stories of the streets as it journeys through the world. The supervisor yells, his voice cracking like a whip across the floor, but I barely hear him. I have moved beyond the scope of his petty authority. I have realized that my life, however crushed it may be, is not a self-contained tragedy. It is a part of the greater weave. I pick up my awl, and as I begin the first stitch of the day, I do it with a new solemn grace. I am not just making a boot, I am sending a piece of my witness out into the light. The machine may own my time, but it cannot stop the transmission of my truth. I am a part of the city, and the city by extension is now a part of the archive. I have become a relic. Looking down the rows of the workshop, I see them, the new ones. They are younger, thinner, and their eyes have not yet learned the protective glaze of the machine's veterans. They stumble over their tools, their hands fumbling with the leather, and they tremble at the sound of the foreman's voice with a raw, visceral terror that I haven't felt in years. I realize, with a heavy, sinking clarity, that I am now one of the oldest souls in this cavern. The others who started when I did are gone, carried out by disease, broken by the floorboards, or discarded when their eyes finally failed. I watch a boy, no older than 15, struggling to match the rhythm of the belt drive. His hands are a mess of small, fresh cuts, and his breathing is shallow, panicked. In the past, I might have felt a cruel detachment, a need to protect my own meagre production pace. But today, a strange, weary tenderness takes hold. I see my own past reflected in his panic. I see the same desperate, futile hope that if he just works harder, if he just remains invisible, he might survive this place. I know better now. I know the machine doesn't care about his hope. It only cares about the output. When the foreman approaches, his shadow looming over the boy like a blade, I do something I have never done before. I don't look away. I shift my pace, subtly adjusting my own output to compensate for the boy's slowness, creating a visual rhythm that draws the foreman's eyes toward me rather than the shivering child. It is a minor act of subversion, a tiny sacrifice of my own energy, but it is enough. The foreman grunts at me, annoyed by the slight change in cadence, and moves on. The boy doesn't look at me. He doesn't know what happened, and he never will. I am just another anonymous, broken-down worker at a bench, but for that moment I wasn't just a cog. I was a guardian of the continuity of suffering. I realize that my role in this archive is shifting once again. I'm no longer just the witness. I am the veteran, the one who has survived long enough to recognize the pattern of the beast. There is a profound, aching sadness in this. I am watching the cycle renew itself, seeing the same tragedy played out by different actors. I am the elder of the abyss, and I have become a ghost among the living. My hands, once precise and elegant, are now gnarled and thick, the leather I work with becoming an extension of my own weathered skin. The factory is a river of bodies, and I'm the debris that has snagged on the bank, watching the current sweep the others toward their end. I continue to stitch, my movements fluid and effortless, a master of a craft that has consumed my life. I am the living history of this workshop, and I have resigned myself to my role, to be the quiet observer, the one who knows the cost of every stitch, and the one who will bear witness until the last light in this place finally flickers out. I have stopped looking at the clock on the far wall. Its brass face is perpetually coated in a fine layer of coal dust, its hands moving with a slow, indifferent mechanical lethargy. To measure my life by the hours is to accept the factory's definition of time, and I have rejected that. I measure my life in boots. I have calculated that in my time here, my hands have shaped and stitched over 30,000 pairs. 30,000 pairs of souls, or rather 30,000 journeys. I think of the sheer distance those boots have covered. If you were to lay them end to end, they would stretch across the entirety of England, winding their way through the city streets, over the country lanes, and into the far reaches of the horizon. I am a cartographer of footfalls, a craftsman of miles. There is a terrifying symmetry to this. My body is failing, my joints swell in the damp. My sight is a blurred struggle, and my lungs feel as if they are lined with soot. Yet the boots I made 10 years ago are, in many cases, still intact. The leather I stretched, the seams I tightened with my own desperate strength, have outlived the vitality of my youth. I have traded the best years of my life to create objects more durable than myself. I am the fleeting creator, and the leather is the lasting monument. Sometimes during the deepest, quietest hours of the night, I imagine them, those thousands of boots walking in the dark, separated by miles, by class, by fate. They are a ghost army, silently treading upon the earth, all of them bearing the invisible mark of my labour. I have become a part of the world's movement, a quiet pulse beneath the souls of humanity. The machine still demands its quota, and the foreman still paces with his hollow, arrogant rhythm. But they are playing a game with seconds and farthings. I have realized that my work belongs to a longer chronology. I'm weaving the history of this century into the heels and souls of the people who live in it. When I finally fall, when my hands can no longer pull the thread and my eyes can no longer find the stitch, the boots will still be walking. I am a man of dust and bone, but I have created things of substance. As I pick up the awl one more time, the weight of it feels different. It is not just a tool of enslavement anymore. It is the stylus with which I write my existence into the world. I am finished with the fear of the end. Let the machine take my life, piece by piece, as it always has. It is merely paying for the legacy I have already set in motion, step by step, across the long scarred road of the world. The silence of the workshop was fractured today by something so unusual that it felt like an act of rebellion. It was a newspaper, a ragged, ink-stained scrap of the Star, smuggled in by the boy who sits at the bench near the door. He had found it lining a crate of materials, and during a momentary lapse in the foreman's vigilance, he unfolded it beneath the shadow of his apron. The news was not of the factory, but of the world. Whispers of workers in the north organizing, of strikes, of demands for shorter hours and cleaner air. To the others, it was just paper. They looked at it with the same dull, fearful suspicion they reserved for anything that did not involve leather and thread. But to me, reading the blurred, cheap print over the boy's shoulder, it felt like a thunderclap. The words union, rights, dignity were strange, uncomfortable syllables in this place of constant grinding. They tasted like fresh air, sharp and dangerous. I watched the foreman move toward us, and for the first time in years I didn't feel the familiar, sickening drop of dread. I felt a surge of cold, calculated defiance. The news was already here. You can destroy the paper, you can burn the scrap, but you cannot unhear the truth. The realization that there are others, men and women, thousands of miles away, who refuse to be just fuel for the machine, is a fire that cannot be easily extinguished. The boy folded the paper away, his hands trembling as he shoved it into his waistband. He looked at me, a brief, fleeting glance that held a question. I didn't smile, a smile would be too loud, but I gave him a slow, deliberate nod. It was a recognition of a shared secret. The atmosphere in the room shifted. It was subtle, barely perceptible to the uninitiated, but the rhythm of the work seemed to lose its mechanical, mindless quality. The hammers didn't hit with the same resignation, they hit with a cadence of inquiry. As the day wore on, the factory continued to roar, but the sound had changed for me. It was no longer the anthem of our defeat, it was the noise of a cage that was beginning to rattle. I'm an old man, and my hands are tired, but tonight, as I walk through the fog of the East End, my gait is different. I am carrying the echoes of that newspaper. The machine thinks it has total control, but it is blind to the slow, invisible erosion of its power. We are not just stitching boots. We are keeping a rhythm that is slowly, inevitably beating its way toward the end of our silence. The archive in my mind has found its newest, most dangerous chapter, and for the first time in a decade, I'm not just waiting for the end, I am waiting for the beginning. We are no longer just co-workers. We are nodes in a secret, invisible network. The newspaper did not stay hidden for long. It travelled bit by bit, from the boy at the door to the man at the polishing bench, and eventually to me. It didn't exist as a physical object anymore. It had been shredded into tiny fragments, hidden in pockets, or tucked into the soles of boots, but its message had been internalized. The words union and rights were being translated into the only language we knew, the language of the shop floor. I have become the keeper of the temperature. The younger ones are burning with a premature, dangerous heat. They want to shout. They want to stop the machines. They want to demand the impossible today. I see them looking at me, expecting me to lead, to give the signal for the explosion. They see my steady hands and my unblinking eyes, and they mistake my endurance for readiness. They don't understand that the machine has a long memory and a short temper. I pull the boy aside near the charcoal stove under the pretext of checking his stitching. "Patience," I whisper, my voice barely audible over the hiss of the gas. "If you strike today, they will replace you tomorrow. They will break you before you even begin." He looks at me, frustrated, his youth chafing against the reality of our chains. I place a hand on his shoulder, a rare human gesture in this place of iron and wood. "The archive is not built in a day," I tell him. "We are learning the machine's weaknesses. We are observing, we are gathering the strength of the collective. When we act, it will not be a shout, it will be a collapse. We are building a quiet, dangerous solidarity. It manifests in small ways. We no longer compete to exceed our quotas, we cap our output at a reasonable, consistent level to deny the foreman his bonus metrics. We share bread in the dim corners of the alleyway, not just as sustenance, but as a communion of intent. The workshop feels different now. The tension is no longer one of fear, but of anticipation. We are a coiled spring, and the supervisor in his arrogance does not realize that the rhythm he dictates is now being used to synchronize our breathing. I go back to my bench and pick up the thread. I am teaching them how to be invisible, how to be silent, and how to be dangerous. I am the archivist of the abyss, but I am also the architect of the resistance. We are not just making boots anymore. We are stitching together a future that the machine cannot comprehend. Every day that passes without a spark is a day we grow stronger, more unified and more certain of our inevitable awakening. The machine grumbles on, thinking it is the master of our movements, but it is only the stage upon which we are rehearsing for the day the music stops. The foreman is a man who loves his numbers. He lives by the ledger, measuring the worth of a human soul by the number of souls stitched per hour. For years he has pushed us, whipped us with his gaze, and driven the pace until the rhythm of the workshop was a manic, frantic pulse. But lately he is looking at his charts with a deepening, confused frown. The production hasn't dropped. That would be an excuse for an immediate purge, but it has stopped growing, it has plateaued. He is pacing the floor with a new, frantic energy. He suspects something, but he cannot put his finger on the source of this rebellion. There is no shouting, no meeting, no overt act of defiance. We are working exactly as hard as we always have, but we are no longer rushing. We are moving with a deliberate, steady pace that refuses to be accelerated. It is a subtle, almost invisible form of sabotage. We are proving that we have control over the tempo of our own lives. I see him glaring at the rows, his eyes searching for the weak link, the one who is orchestrating this sudden efficiency. I keep my head down, my all moving with that same monotonous, perfect rhythm. I am the anchor of the pace. I have become the conductor of this silent symphony of non-compliance. When he passes my bench, I can feel his malice radiating like heat from a furnace, but I do not look up. I am an old, tired man at a bench, perfectly unremarkable, perfectly unthreatening. There is a grim, delicious humour in the situation. He is baffled by a resistance that doesn't scream. He tries to bark orders, he tries to increase the pressure, but the response is always the same, a slight, polite acknowledgement, followed by a return to the exact same steady pace. He is fighting a ghost. He cannot punish us for working, and he cannot force us to run faster when we have already established a ceiling for what is expected. The air in the workshop is thick with this new tension. The other workers feel it too, a shared, quiet confidence that ripples through the room. We aren't doing anything illegal, yet we are dismantling his authority piece by piece. The foreman is beginning to look smaller, his posture less rigid, his shouts less authoritative. He is realizing, perhaps for the first time, that the machine he prides himself on managing is made of flesh and bone, and that those parts have their own rhythm. We are no longer just tools of production. We are a collective, and we are holding the line. Every stitch I make today feels like a brick being pulled out from under his foundation. The machine continues to run, but it is no longer the master. It is merely the vessel, and we are the ones who decide how fast it travels. The inevitable spark has finally flown. It happened over a scrap of leather, a piece the foreman claimed was wasted, a flimsy excuse to exert his fraying authority. He dragged the boy who brought the newspaper out from behind his bench, his face purple with a sudden violent rage. He began to strike him, his heavy boots kicking at the boy's legs, his shouts echoing off the soot-stained walls. He wanted to see the boy cry. He wanted to hear a plea for mercy. He wanted to restore the order of terror that had defined this place for so long. I waited for the usual reaction, the averted eyes, the cowering shoulders, the frantic return to work to show we were good labourers. It didn't come. As the foreman's voice reached a crescendo of abuse, the sound of the shop began to die. It started with the hammers. One by one, they ceased their rhythmic thwack, thwack, thwack. Then the sewing needles stopped pulling. The air, usually thick with the mechanical roar of industry, suddenly fell into a heavy, suffocating silence. Even the belt drive seemed to groan and slow, as if the very machines were confused by the sudden absence of human labour. The foreman stopped mid-kick. He looked around, his chest heaving, his eyes darting from face to face, expecting to see fear. Instead, he saw something far more terrifying, a total, absolute indifference. No one was looking at him. We were all looking down at our own hands, resting motionless on the benches. We weren't defiant in the way he understood. We weren't shaking fists or shouting slogans. We were simply, profoundly absent. We had stepped out of the machine. He felt the power drain from him in that silence. He shouted for us to return to work, his voice cracking, sounding thin and desperate against the wall of our collective stillness. We didn't move, we didn't blink. We were 1,000 statues carved out of misery, united by the singular, quiet refusal to play our part. For the first time, the factory floor was not a place of production, but a place of judgment. He was the one who looked small now, standing over the boy, his hand raised in threat, but lacking the force of fear to back it up. He was an overseer of nothing, a commander of ghosts. The silence grew until it hummed, a low-frequency vibration of thousands of hearts beating in synchronization. He looked at me, his eyes seeking some spark of the old deference, but I simply stared at my own gnarled, calloused fingers. I am the archivist, and today I am writing the truth into the stillness. We were a force of nature, and the machine had finally met its match. The silence that followed was not merely an absence of sound, it was a physical weight, a thick, suffocating presence that seemed to warp the very air of the workshop. The head overseer stood paralysed, his raised hand looking increasingly ridiculous, like a weapon held against a phantom. He was trapped in the vacuum of our refusal. Then, from the doorway came the sound of polished boots. The owners of the factory had arrived, drawn by the sudden, unprecedented cessation of the machinery. They walked onto the floor, their fine coats smelling of expensive tobacco and coal smoke, a jarring contrast to the sweat and grime of our existence. They looked at the motionless machines, then at the overseer, and finally at us. They expected chaos. They expected a riot. They did not know how to handle the quiet. The head overseer, desperate to salvage his crumbling authority, pointed a trembling finger at me. He did it, he spat, his voice strained and high. He's the one. He's the ringleader. The eyes of the owners settled on me. I remained exactly as I was, head bowed, hands resting on the workbench, completely still. I did not move to defend myself, nor did I look away in terror. I simply waited. I realized then that I had become the face of the archive. All the stories I had carried, all the injustices I had witnessed had converged into this single point of confrontation. One of the owners stepped closer, his face a mask of cold, analytical curiosity. "Why?" he asked, his voice barely a whisper in the echoing quiet of the shop. "Why throw away your livelihood? Why disrupt the progress of the world?" I finally looked up. I didn't see a master of industry. I saw a small, frightened man who was terrified that the machine he relied upon was breaking. I spoke, my voice raspy and thin from years of disuse, yet it carried across the entire floor, clear as a bell. "We are not disrupting progress," I said, my gaze steady. "We are documenting the cost of it. Every boot you sell, every coin you earn, is built upon the silent exhaustion of the men you discard. We are simply letting you hear the silence that follows your profit." The overseer made a move to drag me from the bench, but he stopped. The rest of the men had stood up, not in anger, not with weapons, but with a synchronized quiet dignity. We were a forest of stillness, an immovable wall of humanity. The owners retreated, their faces pale, their composure shattered by the simple, radical realization that we had collectively decided to stop being their fuel. They didn't know how to fire 1,000 men at once, and they didn't know how to force a silence to become loud again. For the first time, the abyss looked back at them, and it did not blink. The owners retreated, but they did not concede. They left behind a workshop that felt fundamentally different, a space where the air was no longer just heavy, but charged with the static electricity of an impending storm. The head overseer remained, his face pale and his eyes wide with a manic, flickering desperation. He didn't scream anymore, he didn't even yell. He simply stood on the raised platform, watching every movement we made with a predatory, unblinking intensity. The factory floor became a panopticon of malice. We were forbidden from speaking, forbidden from exchanging glances, and even our bathroom breaks were strictly timed and monitored by armed guards. They were trying to break our unity not with violence, for they had seen that violence only solidified our resolve, but with the erosion of our spirit. They wanted to make every second in the workshop a test of psychological endurance. I felt the pressure mounting on my own shoulders. I knew I was the primary target. I was the one who had spoken, the one who had given voice to the archive. I saw the enforcers lingering near my station, their eyes tracing the calloused, scarred map of my hands, looking for the pencil, the scrap of leather, anything that could justify my immediate removal. My mind became my only true sanctuary, but even there, the siege was encroaching. The fatigue began to settle into my marrow, a deep, bone-weary exhaustion that made it harder to maintain the stillness. Yet there was an unexpected beauty in this siege. The younger workers, the ones I had feared might break under the heightened scrutiny, were learning the art of the ghost. They moved with a fluid, silent grace, performing their tasks with a mechanical efficiency that fooled the overseers while shielding their own interior lives. We had developed a language of micro-gestures, a slight tilt of the head, a rhythmic tapping of a hammer, a subtle shift in posture. We were communicating in code, building a fortress out of glances and heartbeats. The siege was working, but not in the way they intended. By trying to isolate us, they had inadvertently forged us into a single, cohesive organism. I sat at my bench, my awl pulling through the thick hide, and I realized that we were no longer just workers waiting for the whistle. We were survivors, and every hour we endured under their watchful, fearful eyes was a victory. The archive was no longer just in my mind, it was alive in the rhythm of every man in the room. They had built a prison around us, but they had forgotten that they were trapped inside it with us. They came for me at dawn, while the factory was still waking up to its own mechanical pulse. 2 enforcers dragged me not to the gates but to the refinement room, a small windowless concrete box tucked away in the deepest corner of the factory's foundation. They didn't hit me. They didn't need to. They simply locked the heavy iron door behind me, leaving me in the suffocating embrace of total, absolute silence. For the first time in years, the roar of the factory was gone. There was no clatter of heels, no hiss of steam, no vibration of the floorboards. In its place was an emptiness, so profound it made my ears ring. They were trying to kill the archive by killing the surroundings that nourished it. Without the rhythm of the workshop, without the presence of the others, they hoped I would unravel, that the memory would dissipate, leaving me a hollow, broken man. I spent the first few hours pacing the room, my fingers tracing the cold, damp walls. The panic threatened to surge, a wild, irrational beast clawing at my throat. I missed the smell of the leather, the comforting, soul-crushing regularity of the stitch, the sight of the boy's terrified but determined eyes. I was truly, finally alone. But as the hours turned into what felt like days, I realized the trap was also a gift. In the silence, the archive began to crystallize. Without the distraction of the machine, the names of the dead, the memories of every life I had documented, became more vivid than they had ever been on leather. I sat on the floor, closing my eyes, and began to weave them together. I wasn't just remembering, I was constructing a cathedral of thought. I understood then that they hadn't isolated me. They had liberated me from the noise. I was the keeper of the truth, and this room was the vault. I could hear the faint, muffled thud of the factory echoing through the pipes, a distant, dying heartbeat. They think they are keeping me here until I break, until I beg for the comfort of the assembly line. They don't realize that in this silence I'm finally free to finish the record. The machine has its ledger, but I have the truth, and truth, I realized, does not need a machine to survive. It only needs a witness, and I have never been more awake. I lost count of how many days I had been entombed in the refinement room. My world had shrunk to the four walls and the relentless, crystal-clear clarity of my own mind. I was no longer waiting for release. I was waiting for the end of the archive's final chapter. But then, the muffled rhythm of the factory above me changed. It didn't stutter, it stopped completely. Then came a sound I had not heard in all my years here, the sound of 1,000 human footsteps moving in unison, not to the rhythm of the belt drive, but to a heartbeat of their own. It was a low, crumbling thud that shook the very foundations of my concrete cell. The heavy iron door did not creak open, it was torn from its hinges. The light that flooded in was not the harsh gaslight of the workshop, but the collective, focused gaze of the men I had left behind. They stood there, covered in the dust of the factory, their faces smudged with soot and exhaustion, but their eyes were burning with a terrifying, beautiful resolve. They hadn't come for a wage, they hadn't come for a meal, they had come for the archivist. The boy who had brought the newspaper was at the front. He looked at me, not with the terror of a novice, but with the quiet strength of a successor. He didn't say a word. He simply offered his hand, and as I took it, I felt the calluses, the proof of our shared labour, the evidence of our existence. There was no violence, there was no need for it. The enforcers who guarded the room had vanished, overwhelmed by the sheer silent mass of the men who filled the corridor. We walked out of the foundation, back toward the main floor, moving like a tide that had finally remembered its power. The factory was a shell, a hollow, lifeless monument to greed. The machine had stopped, not because it was broken, but because the spirit that fueled it had decided to leave. We were walking toward the exit, toward the grey morning light of London, and for the first time I felt the weight of the archive leave my shoulders. It was no longer mine to carry, it was theirs. We were not leaving a job, we were reclaiming our lives. The transition from the belly of the beast to the streets of London was a sensory assault. As we crossed the threshold, the heavy, suffocating air of the factory, that eternal mixture of oil, sweat and despair, finally dissipated, replaced by the damp, biting chill of a London morning. The sunlight was not the flickering, jaundice-yellow gaslight I had lived under for decades. It was pale, diffused, and impossibly vast. It hit my eyes with a force that made me stumble. For a long moment I stood at the factory gates, unable to move. I looked down at my hands. They were still stained with the dark, indelible dyes of the shop floor, the skin etched with the tiny, jagged scars of 1,000 mistakes and 1,000 masteries. They were the hands of a worker, but as the wind stirred the heavy wool of my coat, I felt a lightness I hadn't known since I was a child. Behind me, the factory stood silent, a hulking mass of iron and brick that suddenly appeared remarkably fragile. The men poured out of the doors, a river of humanity spilling into the narrow streets of the East End. We did not run, we did not cheer. We simply walked, shoulder to shoulder, a silent procession of souls who had finally laid down the tools of their own enslavement. The city went on around us. Carriages rattled past. Street vendors shouted their wares, and the wealthy hurried to their appointments, oblivious to the fact that 1,000 ghosts had just stepped back into the world of the living. I realized then that the archive I had built was not a finished book. It was an opening. As I looked at the faces of the men walking beside me, I saw the reflection of everything I had documented, the suffering, the endurance, and the quiet, smouldering rage. We were no longer hidden in the shadows of the machinery. We were out here, in the cold, hard light of day, and our stories were beginning to manifest in the very way we walked, the way we held our heads, the way we looked at the world. I reached into my pocket and found nothing, no scraps of leather, no secret records, and yet I felt heavier, more substantial than I ever had. The history of the factory, the names of the ones who hadn't made it to this morning, was etched into the marrow of my bones. I was the bridge between the silence of the abyss and the noise of the future. I turned my back on the factory for the final time, my stride matching the rhythm of the men around me. We were walking into the unknown, but for the first time we were walking as masters of our own path. The archive was safe, and for the first time in my life, I felt the dawn. The factory is now a memory, a dark, heavy shadow receding into the fog of the past. I sit on a park bench overlooking the Thames, watching the water churn, grey, relentless, and eternally moving. My hands, once the frantic instruments of production, now lie still and quiet in my lap. They are gnarled, stained, and weary, but they are finally my own. I think of the thousands of boots I have stitched, the miles they have walked, and the lives they have carried across this scarred, beautiful world. I think of the names I held in the vault of my mind, the men who broke, the women who faded, the stories that were never told in any ledger but mine. I realize now that the archive was never meant to be a record for them to find. It was a testimony for us to carry. They say that history is written by the victors, by those who own the factories and the ledgers, by those who record their profit in ink and stone, but history is also written in the soles of the shoes that walk the earth. It is written in the silence of those who refuse to be forgotten, and in the rhythm of the hands that continue to build even when the world demands we break. I am an old man, and my story ends here, where the river meets the tide, but the archive continues. Every time someone stands against the machine, every time a voice rises from the silence, every time a hand reaches out to pull another from the abyss, my record lives on. It is not printed on leather or paper, it is encoded in the spirit of those who follow. I close my eyes and listen to the city. It is a cacophony of life, of struggle, of laughter, of labour, and of dreams. It is no longer the roar of the factory, but the symphony of the living. I am no longer Benedict the archivist. I am simply a man who has witnessed the truth, and that truth is enough to set the world in motion. The ink has dried on my ledger, the awl has been put down, and the thread is cut. I have finished my part in the great weave. The boots are walking, the people are waking, and the story of the abyss is finally, mercifully becoming a story of the light. The ledger is closed. The witness is at peace. Sleepy History with Benedict is created for relaxation, entertainment, and sleep purposes. The stories shared on this channel are inspired by historical events, daily life, and real periods in history, but they may be simplified, adapted, or narrated in a calming way to enhance the listening experience. This content is not intended to be a precise academic or educational source. While we aim to stay generally accurate, some details may be altered for storytelling flow and relaxation. Please do not rely on this channel as a primary source for historical research or study. By listening, you acknowledge that this content is designed to help you unwind, relax, and fall asleep. Thank you for your understanding and support.